To fire up all across the fruited plains of the internet. Before we dive into it, we've got Michael Sussmann trial day 4. We're going to wrap up with a little bit of day 3. Marc Elias, of course, was the transcript witness that we left off with yesterday. We're going to pick back up with him, and then we're spending all day on James Baker. Jim Baker, former FBI general counsel, the guy who actually met with Michael Sussmann, which of course is Hillary Clinton's former campaign lawyer. We've got the morning transcripts, and we've got to get into it. Before we do, though, let's, of course, start, as usual, with an overview from the mind map to get our bearings straight. And for those of you just joining us, this is the mind map. I think I forgot to put it in the YouTube chat. Oh, yeah, here it is. Let's throw the mind map right there into the YouTube live stream chat. We're going to pin that to the top. And so if you want to follow along at home, then you can certainly go ahead and do that. But this is the mind map. Now, just to get our bearings straight, we like to start off by recalling where we left off. On Monday, we started with jury selection, got a full jury. Day 2, we got opening arguments. We heard from a couple of the FBI agents and then somebody who worked at News Star. Yesterday, we spent all day talking about these 3 people: Deborah Fine, former campaign advisor, campaign lawyer to Hillary Clinton; Laura Sego, who worked over at Fusion GPS; and we ended with Marc Elias, the big boy, the guy who is the big lead over at the Democratic Party, the guy who runs Democracy Docket, kind of a heavy hitter there for the DNC. He was on the stand, and man, we did not get much out of him. It was pretty much a whole bunch of I don't recalls, I don't remember, this was 6 years ago, and it's really confusing for me. I'm just a dummy. I don't know much about anything. But we're going to start off with him because we get a little bit more sort of uselessness before we really spend some time with James Baker. Jim Baker, he goes by short. And James Baker is somebody who is kind of a tough witness for both sides. He kind of has some sympathies for Michael Sussmann, but he's not very dispositive one way or the other. We're going to see. He kind of helps the prosecution. He kind of helps the defense. And it's really kind of becoming an interesting case because we've got a big tension that exists here. And I want to spend a quick minute talking about this before we dive into the transcripts. But remember, in most cases, in most criminal cases, the government, when they bring their witnesses forward, they are their witnesses. They are going to be very favorable to the government story and the government's narrative. So you would expect that every single one of the witnesses that is being called by these prosecutors, Pertain Shah, DeFilippis, Jonathan Algor, that they would be favorable to them. But what we're seeing is they're really not. Okay, James Baker is actually friends with Michael Sussmann. Marc Elias, he's a Democrat. He's also friends with Michael Sussmann, as we're going to see. And these were all people who were Democrats working together to elect Hillary Clinton, right? They're not even hiding this. They were partisan political actors. And so that means they're on the same team. And so they're going to circle the wagons around their team member. Michael Sussmann's in a little bit of trouble. And so they're going to all come and sort of defend him to some degree. And you can expect that. But we've been seeing a lot of it as we're going to go through when we pick up with Marc Elias. He's sort of just, I don't remember. And all of that is to help the defense. So it's a very difficult, precarious position for prosecutors to try to prove their case using witnesses who are not on their side, who are actually in favor of the defense. And we're kind of going to see a little bit more of that with James Baker. But James Baker is kind of sticking to his guns on saying that Michael Sussmann was not, in fact, open and honest about him being there on behalf of Hillary. So we've got a lot to get to. As I mentioned today, some of the main actors that we're going to hear from, Judge Cooper actually he kind of gets involved in this. We've got some objections and some problems that he's going to have to deal with. We see Sean Berkowitz, Michael Bosworth, 2 people from the defense, very active today. A lot of objections today. I noticed this. I was just very quickly perusing through the transcripts. But Bosworth and Berkowitz, they've been pretty quiet with their objections for some time. But today they were really sort of flying them all over the place. Why? Because they had a tough witness for their side. Here it was, Jim Baker. They knew that he was going to come out and kind of make it difficult for them. And so they tried to get the flow of the prosecutor a little bit off in order to make their point. So a lot of objections from them. We had a couple interesting issues pop up that we'll spend some time on. There was a motion to dismiss for a mistrial. Okay, so yesterday, and this didn't go anywhere. So a lot of people were like, whoa, maybe this may be a dismissal of this case. But yesterday, Judge Cooper said he was not inclined to grant a motion to dismiss. we'll back up on this and spend a quick minute on it. But essentially what happened is when Marc Elias was testifying, they're saying that the prosecutor queued him up to comment on Michael Sussmann not testifying, which would be inappropriate because if you are a criminal defendant, you have the right not to testify. If you don't want to get up there, that's your right. You have, the Constitution gives you the right against self-incrimination. It's a good one. We use it frequently. And you can't even comment on that. So you can't get up there if you're a prosecutor and say, well, you know, this is really confusing. It'd be very nice if Michael Sussmann just got off his butt and came up here and told us about this. Why wouldn't he do that? Maybe because he's guilty, huh? If a prosecutor did that, that would be a big no-no, and they would get booted. They would get in trouble for that. So they kind of are saying that that's what happened yesterday. The judge ultimately is saying, no, that's not what happened. And so no mistrial. We see that got denied, happened very quickly. There was the motion yesterday. Judge turned right around and said, nope, denied. Now, there was another interesting issue that popped up, which is also very funny, I guess, is here, prosecutor wanted to remove a particular juror, and this is juror number 5. Why? Because juror number 5 is a female, and her daughter is on the same high school sports team as Michael Sussmann. You're kidding me. What a small world. It's Washington, D.C. All these people just know each other. They all hang out with each other. They all vote the same way and support the same candidates, I guess. So there's this little sort of real close connection. Of course, juror number 5 didn't know anything about this. I had no idea they went to the same school. I had no idea they were on the same team. Prosecutors are saying she's got to get booted out of there. And it's probably not because of the fact that they go to the same school. I'm guessing that juror number 5 is probably not just a good juror, right? May have been the person who actually phone banked for Hillary Clinton or something. So we'll see. But that's what we're talking about largely today. And of course, to get our dates right, remember that James Baker met with Michael Sussmann in September of 2016. James Baker, at the time, he works for Twitter now, but at the time he was general counsel for the FBI. They had the meeting. After the meeting, Bill gave the notes over to Tricia Anderson and Bill Priestep. And there's a lot of debate, a lot of conversation about whether Baker remembers if Sussmann said he was there on behalf of somebody else, if Sussmann was actually affirmatively saying, I am not coming on behalf of another client, because James Baker has testified several times and given many interviews, and his story has kind of changed. And so we didn't know what he was going to testify to. Presumably the prosecutors did, but us as casual observers, we didn't know. And what happens if Jim Baker takes the stand and says, oh yeah, no, Michael Sussmann did in fact tell me that he was here on behalf of Hillary Clinton? Well, that makes the government prosecutors in their case pretty difficult to prove then, doesn't it? Because that would mean he's not a liar. But James Baker, as we're going to see, held steady to his original opinion, saying that Sussmann did not bring that up. Okay, so without any further ado, let's jump into the transcripts. Before we do, I want to acknowledge a couple super chats that have already come in. And thank you very much for these super chats, everybody. They do fund the transcripts, okay? The transcripts that we're about to go through are $1.20 a page, every single one of those. And the first one came in today from Tammy Beck, says, can Hillary be indicted if Sussmann is acquitted? And so, yeah, I mean, the answer is yes, she could. I think it would be very unlikely, because remember how we have to sort of build these cases. You have to connect the dots. You have to sort of link. The way I describe this to people often is you have to sort of link the chains together. And Sussmann is kind of the first link in the chain. And if you can't get a conviction there, then maybe there's no tentacles and no other way that this can go. And if you can't get a conviction on this, it's very unlikely that you're going to get a grand jury or an indictment against Hillary Clinton, who is many, many, many layers removed. Okay. She's just going to sit there and go, I have no idea what any of these people were doing. How could I be potentially liable for any of this? That's ridiculous. Right. So she could. I mean, the answer is she always could, but very, very unlikely, unfortunately, which is why a lot of people are so invested in this, because if Sussmann does get convicted, well, maybe that means there's enough here to pursue another indictment, another grand jury, even in DC of all places, might be willing to pull the proverbial conviction trigger on this one. But we'll see. Thank you for that, Tammy Beck. Another one came in from Tom Conwell. Thank you, Tom, for the transcript fun. And Glenn Talman says, great job, Robert. I appreciate that. Another sticker came in from Elaine Smith. And thank you very much for those, everybody. I do appreciate that. And if you can't support the show with the transcript fund, no problem at all. I appreciate that. I'm just glad that you're here. While you're here, I would love a subscription if you're not already subscribed, so that you can always find us, because we're going to keep doing this until the trial is over, because the spotlight needs to be shown down. Okay, so thanks for the support. Let's jump into the not super chats, transcripts. Without any further ado, here we are. And as I mentioned, we're going to start quickly with the yesterday session, because it's not that long. And yesterday we were wrapping up with Marc Elias, and he is a pretty important character in this whole saga. And so I want to make sure we devote the appropriate time to him. Here we see this took place yesterday, May 18th, 1:57 p.m., the afternoon session. Everybody was back there except the one prosecutor, Mr. Keelty. He's still out on family leave. And because I got this transcript very late last night, I was able this morning to kind of come in here and add a couple photographs and highlight a few things. But these are the two people that we are talking about today. We've got Marc Elias, James Baker. James Baker, currently at Twitter, former general counsel for the FBI, the lawyer for the FBI. Marc Elias, Hillary Clinton's chief campaign lawyer, right? The guy at the top of the whole legal counsel entire operation was Marc Elias. Two key witnesses, and this was the wrap up of yesterday. A lot of government exhibits came in. Most of these were emails and invites, calendar invites, and things like that. But all of this will be something that will fly through relatively quickly. Now, they came back from lunch. Yesterday, remember, Marc Elias was done testifying, and he was giving us a bunch of I don't remembers, which was going to be a big part of this entire case because it happened in 2016, which is, one of my biggest criticisms has been this is all by design. You can do whatever you want in the run up to an election because you won't even get punished for it until 6 years later. By the time this is over, maybe it's 8 years later, and maybe there's somebody who's in charge of the government at that point in time that makes this whole thing, less consequential if there does happen to be a conviction. But I digress. Let's get to the transcripts. Court says, all right, everybody, pipe down, have a seat. I know you just had a rowdy lunch. We're back on the record. Mr. Elias, you're back up on the stand. And he gets up and jumps up there. Now, the court let juror number 8 know. I think we talked about that yesterday. Yeah, juror number 8 yesterday had a problem. He forgot he had to start a new job, and he was able to deal with that. But before they jump into the direct exam of Marc Elias again, Mr. DeFilippis, the government prosecutor, says, we have a scheduling matter. And I posted about this on Locals last night and on Twitter, which I forgot to pull up that thread, but I think I do need to pull that up because that was hilarious. Government prosecutor comes out. He says, we have a scheduling problem, Judge. So Kevin P., he says, abbreviating the last name, very important. We got a first name Kevin, last name P., who is scheduled to testify from the CIA. Oh, now we know why it's abbreviated. Has a family issue. He has to go up to meet his parents who are in failing health, which is terrible. So pray for Kevin's parents. And for that reason, we would like to get him on the stand this week. So can we move him up? The prosecutors say, Your Honor, we would propose to, because Mr. Mook will go on Friday. That's Hillary's former campaign lawyer. They say our proposal, and I think the defense agrees, would be to also to do Mr. Blank on Friday. Uh-oh. Now, if you're watching this at home, you see there's a black box that is redacting that name. And we know that he just said his first name is Kevin. And we know that this is talking about CIA activity. And somebody else on Twitter, now let's take a look at this, make sure I can pull this up briefly, because this was interesting. When I posted this on Twitter yesterday, somebody was able to put, a little 2 and 2 together. And once I made that connection, here we have this commenter who says this. So 5 letters, huh? More or less, starting with a P. Very interesting. And then somebody else named TJ says Price, Pruitt, Peters. And we start to get a little bit concerned that we're all going to be rounded up and dropped off at the CIA rendition site. Because now you can sort of piece them together. Kevin Peters, Kevin Pruitt, Kevin Price. I don't know. Doesn't sound good, though. But it's going to be good to have company when those helicopters come swooping in. But anyways, the prosecutor has no idea. He says, well, we don't think his testimony is going to be long, and they just don't even recognize it. The court says, all right, Mr. Prosecutor, so you've estimated 30 minutes, huh? And he says, yeah, Your Honor, I'd say 30 to 40 minutes. Judge still has no idea that he just outed a CIA official and says, that's fine with me. Why don't we plan to do that? And Berkowitz now says he's the defense. He doesn't catch it either. So the defense is still moving on. He says, look, the government consulted us. We have no issues going on Friday as long as we need to go. And meanwhile, you can't see this from the transcripts, but you know this is going on. The court clerk, Lisa, and we have the best court clerks here, people. I mean, she's amazing. She's outstanding. The transcripts are coming in hot, like fresh out of the oven every day. But she is like saying like she's doing one of these to the judges. You can't see it, and she's not typing that she's doing this, but she's like, hey, dummies. Hey, he just said his name. So the court says, the judge finally catches wind of this and says, please get on the phone, sir. Please get on the phone. And then the court clerk says, whereupon the following proceedings were had at the sidebar. The judge says this on the phone, right? So this is taking place. The jury can't hear this now. Anybody in the media rooms probably can't hear this, my understanding is. And so we can only see this from the transcripts. Judge says to the prosecutor and to the defense, oh, shoot, I think you may have inadvertently said his name. Mr. DeFilippis, the prosecutor, says, Kevin P. No, Kevin P. Yeah, I think I said Kevin P. Court says, if you did, I'll ask the court reporter to redact the last name. So it doesn't even know. The prosecutor says, thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate it. And guess what? There was a name in there that was, of course, redacted. So all the jurors, everybody in the courtroom probably heard the dude's name. So while Kevin P. is there taking care of his parents, we wish him well, hope he is safe. Now, I was kind of joking about it yesterday, but then other people were like, hey, it's not that funny, Rob. You know, he's a CIA agent, and there may be people out to get Kevin Pierce. It's a good point. Yeah, it's a good point. It is not that funny. I think it's kind of, you know, what's kind of funny to me is not that individual might be in danger. That's not something to laugh about. But it is sort of the ineptitude of the entire bureaucracy under which we are all living. But anyways, the transcript continues. Court says, after lunch, there was a long line in the cafeteria, maybe a few minutes out there. And then he says, Mr. Elias, you're back. You're still under oath, aren't you? And he is. So they continued the direct exam. And yesterday we spent, 90 pages of the transcript talking about billing stuff. And the billing thing is very tedious. As you know, I'm not too interested in it, but it is important because this is the connection that makes the link connect between the two different stories that are happening. One, well, it shows, in my opinion, the direct linkage between Sussmann's lie and his appearance in his meeting with the FBI. He went to the meeting, he went back and billed Hillary. Had he gone to the meeting and not sent a bill to Hillary, it would have been a lot more believable, but he didn't. He did the two together, which is why that second half, this billing component, is so important and why the government is spending so much stinking time on it. But they go back to it, and what they're trying to show, and this is, we're going to see how ridiculous this is. I mean, the prosecutor, I think, is doing a good job on this, because you're going to see that it makes Mr. Elias's testimony seem very unbelievable, right? The government is going to, in other words, connect a bunch of these meetings back to back. And you're going to see that the judge is going to say, we get the billing records, we get the calendaring, move on with this. But he's just going to show, okay, on this date, on this date, on that date, on this date, on this date, you met with Jaffe and Sussmann, and you met with all of these other people who were in cahoots with you on this grand conspiracy. And you don't remember this meeting or that meeting or that meeting or this meeting? And he's going, no, I don't. No, I don't. No, I don't. No, I don't. And you go, well, that's weird, because it sort of feels like this is a big, gigantic project that you did, in fact, work a lot on. You know, it'd be like one of us, you or I, in our current professions, working on a project for 6 months, and then 6 years later, not remembering anything about it in a very big, important time, right? In the run up to an election, kind of like the climactic event of anybody's career. You only get a few of those things. And so the prosecutor is just going to go through this slowly and methodically, because that's what prosecutors do. I don't know how convincing this is to the jurors. Their eyes may have been glazed over. I mean, we're going to see the judge kind of gets irritated, but this is what the back overview kind of strategy that is taking place is all about. So the prosecutor says, now, Mr. Elias, before lunch, we were going through those billing records, and we spoke about exhibits and all of these other meetings, and it looks like you met with Fusion, and you met with Sussmann, and you met with Rodney. You recall that? I do, and all of these were calendar invites, and they all were categorized for Clinton, right? Same type of stuff that we saw yesterday. And so I did scroll through this. They're talking about billing amounts and discounts. I highlighted this. Prosecutor DeFilippis says, all right, here, listen here, Mark. So again, And I want to just pause on this one more time. I know we're sort of taking our time getting into the transcripts, but this is supposed to be a favorable witness to the government. Marc is the government's witness. Prosecutors called him, but really he is not a government witness. He's a defense witness. He loves Sussmann. He hates Trump. He loves Hillary. And so he's going to be doing everything he can to not help the government, right? This is not usual. Typically, the prosecutors have a police officer there. They're on the same team. They say, what did he do? And he says, well, he did everything wrong. And the prosecutor says, I know, that's really great. And they, oh, I know. And they, read through a script together and they try to convict people. But this is different. They're not aligned. The witness here does not want a conviction. So just so we understand, like, this is a contentious thing without being contentious. Here, so again, your understanding then, Marc, is that the meeting occurred in your office and Sussmann billed it to the firm's client. And he says, that's my assumption with these records, because he can't remember any of this. Prosecutor asks him, Mr. Elias, all right, I think you'll recall this meeting. And here you had Rodney in your office. Do you remember that one? He says, well, this is the calendar invite. Correct. Okay, so he's not talking about the meeting. He's talking about the calendar invite. Yeah, I see the calendar invite. He says, yeah, that's right. And you said that you testified that you thought it was probably Rodney Jaffe, right? He says, yes, that's my assumption. So I'm not really saying much. Okay. And then we have Mr. Sussmann billing and the billing entry that was billed as a confidential meeting with Mr. Elias and others. Do you recall seeing that? Yes, I do see that, right? So he's not talking about the meeting. He's saying, I see that invite and I see this calendar and I see those names. So the prosecutor says, okay, we've gone through a bunch of these meetings. Again, no recollection of who the quote others are or who they would have been in any of these meetings. He says, no, in fact, I don't even have a recollection of being at the meeting because he doesn't remember anything. Of course, that's the whole strategy, right? And so as we go through this, you're going to see it's a lot of this. I'm sorry for November. There's a lot of problems here. And they're sort of delaying some time. He's saying, do you know whose handwriting this is? I don't know. Don't even have any idea. And there's like this big gap, I think, in the transcript. And then the prosecutor says, a watched pot never boils, Mr. Elias. And he says, well, I'm just making sure you're not waiting on me. And the prosecutor says, no, no, no. So they're just like, I don't know what they're doing. So then the prosecutor says, so this was a calendar invite and the billing entry was for Rodney in your office. This is what we were just looking at, right? Yes. And it's a lot of this, right? Another exhibit, 1900. Mr. Elias, you're not on this email, but can you tell us? Yeah. Hi, Lisa. Michael Sussmann, Marc Elias would like to set up a 30-minute call August 17th. Do you remember any of this stuff? It looks like from your email, any recollection of this? He says, no, not specifically on the 17th. No. Like I said, I generally recall talking to Rodney at some point, but he just can't remember anything. And so it's very frustrating because it's supposed to be the government witness. Another exhibit 327. Mr. Elias, who else is on this invite? That's from Lee Nichols. Lee Nichols, who I think was Sussmann's assistant. Who else was on this invite, Mr. Elias? He says, me and Rodney. Okay, well, what's the subject of the invite? Telephone conference. Whose location? It says Michael and Marc will call Rodney. So Sussmann and Marc Elias are going to call Rodney Jaffe. This is all going to take place August 17th from 5:30 to 6 p.m. And it's on his calendar along with the other 35 calendar invites that they've already talked about from the other 100 pages of exhibits we've covered. Prosecutor says, okay, what, if anything, do you recall about that phone conversation, Marc? I don't. Like I said, I remember talking to him on the phone. I just don't have any recollection of what day it was, right? Very, very non-cooperative, not working with him at all because he doesn't want to answer the question. We go through a lot more billing questions. How much was that bill? $417.50 for a half hour. So these guys are billing about $900 an hour. Another invite was sent. Mr. Elias, who sent this one? Michael Sussmann. Who's the recipient? Me. What's the subject? Rodney. Where does it look like the meeting's going to take place? My office, August 19th. How long? Hour and a half, 10:30 p.m. to noon. Great. We've laid the foundation. We're going to move this into an exhibit. Who's the timekeeper? Michael Sussmann. And how much time did you bill? 3.5 hours, 3.3 hours. The description of this meeting, what was it, Marc? It was a confidential meeting with Marc Elias, others, and confidential follow-up meeting, telephone conferences, and a work on a document. Wonder what document that could have been on August 19th. Anybody have any ideas before the meeting that happened with the FBI later in September? So the prosecutor says, gosh, now we're on like the 35th invite that we've talked about today. What, if any, document here, Mark, do you recall working on with Mr. Sussmann in connection to all of this? All right, now we're on August 17th now. You spent 3.5 hours there. Any memory, Mark? Answer, I don't recall working on a document with Mr. Sussmann about this. Okay. All right, he just doesn't remember anything. All right. So looking at these two documents together, would it appear that they reflect with a meeting with Rodney in your office with Sussmann? Does it appear that Sussmann billed Clinton for that meeting with Jaffe? He says, yes, it does appear that way. In the amount of $2,700? Yes, it appears that way. So almost nothing, right? Non-answers coming out of him. Now, the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what does this mean to the jury? You know, is the jury appreciative of this? Right? Are they sitting there saying, yeah, I probably wouldn't remember this either? And as the prosecutor just connects the dot, right, lays the every single calendar invites, like another boom, another boom, another boom. Yeah, you met with them a lot over this. It's kind of ridiculous. You can't remember anything about it. So Berkowitz, the defense, objects, talking about foundation, says happy to explain. So I don't know what his objection is, but he says he's overruled by the judge basically instantly. Says, I think, Mr. DeFilippis, we get the concept of the records, all right? If we could get through these a little bit more quickly, I mean, for crying out loud, we all get the invites. So the prosecutor says, yes, sure, Your Honor, happy to do that. So he kind of does pick up the pace. He says, Mr. Elias, let me just ask you this. If those meetings did occur, would you have billed them the same and attended them? Would you have billed them the same way? Like if you were there or not there? Because there's a bill here. You just agreed there was a bill. Would that bill be different based upon whether you were there or not? Because if you're there, presumably you're going to add some extra legal analysis time for you, because you're a smart guy and you want to get paid for your contributions and the work you put in on a client file. So it would be different if you weren't there, wouldn't it? He says, if they had happened and I had attended them for the Clinton campaign, I would have billed the time to the Clinton campaign. Yes. And so he moves on, right? Okay, understood. Clinton campaign and the DNC, yes, would have been billed. Okay, understood. So he may have something there, right? He may have some evidence that, in fact, if you do a calculation, 2,700, which sounds low actually to me, right? If you got three, or let's say two lawyers there, Sussmann and Mark, for 3 hours, so that's basically $2,000 an hour, right? Should be more like a $6,000 bill. It's really like a $3,000 bill. So maybe he wasn't actually at that one particular meeting. Who knows? Or maybe he wasn't billing his time because he said previously that sometimes he bills and sometimes he doesn't. See, there's a lot of gray area in the bill, which is why they're spending a lot of time on it. And it's really kind of dry, unfortunately. They talk about a time in which he became aware of Alpha Bank server. He says, yes. Can you recall anything? It's really hard. I can't recall much of anything. But you did alert the campaign about it. And this is fun. Yeah, so he says, I thought it was important for the campaign to know. So the prosecutor says to him, all right, Mark, would it be fair to say that if the allegation were to become public, that you think that that might actually benefit the Hillary Clinton campaign? He says, I thought if there was a news account of the allegation, it would benefit the campaign. And so putting aside any conversations that involved legal advice, what did you do to make that happen? He says, to make what happen? What are you talking about? Prosecutor is being very direct, says to try to promote a news article on the subject if you did, because obviously that would be sort of admitting to doing stuff that's kind of outside the scope of legal work. He's trying to kind of catch him there. If he says, oh, I promoted stuff all the time, well, boom, that's not protected by privilege, by the work product doctrine. That's sort of not legal work. That's campaign public relations work. So none of that matters here. And he says, well, I'm not sure that I don't recall myself doing anything in that time period to promote an article about Alpha Bank, which is the right answer because you're a lawyer, not a public publicist. Oh, prosecutor's like, darn it. You got that one. And how about others on the campaign or working on behalf of the campaign? I don't recall anyone on the campaign doing anything. I don't recall that. And I don't recall this, right? Here's another one. Where did you learn about this? Well, I learned it all from Mr. Sussmann. And they're funneling back the follow-up questions to Mr. Sussmann, knowing that Mr. Sussmann's probably not going to testify. And so there's going to be a big gap where Sussman's sort of like the vacuum cleaner. If there's a point or a question or something that any of these other witnesses don't want to talk about, I don't know, got to ask Sussmann about it. Can we ask Sussmann about it? No, we can't even comment. That Sussmann won't comment on it because of the Fifth Amendment. Okay, let me direct your attention to another exhibit. Let's take a look at this email. Mark, who'd you send this email to if you were notifying people on the campaign? Jake Sullivan, NSA currently, Robbie Mook, Hillary campaign advisor, John Podesta, weird dude, and Jen Palmieri, another advisor. And all of this is conversation about that, right? Mark now is working at Perkins Coie. So just so we're familiar, right? Remembering who Mark is. Mark, he's up here, but really he should kind of be like, it's kind of like this, really. No, I just screwed that up. It's kind of like moving him to there, right? It's kind of like this. Now, I don't sort of necessarily, maybe I kind of like that. Maybe that'll be the new one. We'll see. I'll throw it back the way it was. But here, he's kind of the senior guy. He's in charge. And so there's a lot of questions about it. But he hired Perkins Coie. Perkins Coie was the entity that ultimately contracted with Fusion, which is what created the Alpha Bank story. So now the story would be that once Marc Elias knows about this, he's got an obligation as the liaison between Perkins Coie to Hillary. He's got an obligation to now communicate that over to her, which of course he doesn't remember. Did this email relate to issues we've been discussing with the server? I don't know. I mean, I don't remember specifically. Okay, so you can see, you kind of get the gist of this. We have another exhibit. This one getting closer to our meeting date. All right, this one is the 17th of September. It's another billing entry, and so we'll pause on this one briefly. What were the hours on this one, Mr. Elias? 4.8. And which attorney was billing this? Oh, Michael Sussmann, he says. The amount charged to the client. How much did he bill for his 4.8 hours of time? Well, $4,000. And then the description, what was he billing for? Multiple telephone conferences and other communications with experts, media, and communications with M. Elias. That's you, Mark, isn't it? Which experts do you think that refers to? I don't know, he says. Huh. Do you know whether this was related to Alpha Bank? I don't. But you were talking to him, right, during this time? We would have occasional check-ins. And at some point you learned, and he's trying to dial in on this. Well, at what time did you learn? I don't remember. I think it was shortly thereafter. And he just doesn't remember. I don't believe I ever did. I don't recall. I believe he did. Talking about discretion, about what he did with the campaign. And a lot of this, I just don't think is all that impactful. We see down here, we get another question from the prosecutor. He says, not from recollection, okay. Prosecutor cuts him off a little bit, says, got it. Okay, so just situating us then in time. So we go back to the July 29th meeting that we looked at. We looked at also the August 12th meeting, okay? And so this is where he's sort of summarizing all of the different elements that we just went through. I mentioned previously, he's sort of stacking all of the different boom gotchas. And now he's going to give us a summary for the jury. Okay, Mark, look, we've gone through all of this stuff. The judge told me he's annoyed. I know everybody's annoyed with me right now. Let me just summarize this up for us. How about on August 12th? How about on August 17th, you had a meeting in calendar? How about on August 19th, you had a meeting in calendar? And you had a meeting on September 17th as well. All those billing records, they would have been in the run-up to the meeting with the FBI before. And Mark jumps in. He says, correct. He says, now, when you brief members of the campaign about the Alpha Bank member, to the extent you recall, the first question is, who would that be? Who would the first question go to? I don't recall specifically. There it is again. So, going to be more of that. Finally, asking about opposition research and campaign research, saying, Mark, did you have discretion to instruct Fusion to pursue leads and take investigative steps without checking with the campaign? So you had authority to act without the blessing of Hillary herself, Her Highness. Is that right, Mark? And he says, yes. Now that's the end of the cross-examination. And so, aside from what I like, the good is that we got a big list that the prosecutor was able to go through. And Mark was kind of made to look a little bit dumb up there, right? For somebody who's very smart, very intelligent, has probably an excellent memory because he's sitting there referencing, all sorts of statutes and stuff when he's talking about election litigation, but he can't remember, darn it, what he did 6 years ago. And so if the prosecutor puts a very obviously successful person up on there and says, you don't remember this and this and this and this and this and this, well, that's pretty impressive. That's pretty amazing. Other people would, right, in closing arguments, we're going to say it's not credible at all. He knew what they were doing. He's part of this conspiracy. And it was a look, a leak, and a lie, right? He was involved in the lie. And you can see how they're going to try to wrap this whole thing back up into that. Now, the bad of this is that, well, we're going to see some of the bad because Mr. Berkowitz is going to give us some nice cross-examination here. But in addition to the bad, we have here Elias is just, I don't remember anything, right? And a lot of the testimony was pretty bland, pretty dry, all billing calendar related stuff. And we're going to see if the defense can repair some of the damage here. Now, again, we're going to fly through this because we still have all day's testimony from today or all morning from this morning. But there were a couple points that I wanted to highlight, right? They go into background. And this is Berkowitz on behalf of Sussmann, very good lawyer from Latham and Watkins out of New York. Presumably he's a good lawyer. I don't know him, but from what I've seen, they're competent. Here he says, "Good afternoon, Mr. Elias. You're friends with Sussmann, aren't you?" "Yeah, we haven't talked to him in a couple of years, but yeah, it's been a couple of years at least. No longer partners. You're at different firms. You work together at Perkins Coie, all this stuff." Was Sussmann in the political law group at Perkins Coie? No, he wasn't. And you remember speaking to him about some of this stuff? "I remember meeting him," he says. "I don't remember whether the meeting was like sitting with him or like, in and out. I remember talking to him on the phone." So he's just totally downplaying this entire relationship. And you indicated here, Mr. Mark, that you were also somebody who was general counsel for Hillary. Yeah, around April 2000. Oh, no. He says April 2015. And prior to that, and this is where we're going to see, and this is something the defense is doing a good job with, is they're basically making everybody's credentials reach to the moon. Everybody is highly credentialed. Everybody in this is not a political hack at all. Nobody's a political hack. That's ridiculous. These are all highly qualified experts, DNS experts, campaign experts. Everybody's qualified. Michael Sussmann even is, counterintelligence this, and he had all sorts of access because he had worked on all sorts of campaigns. In fact, the FBI even trusted him so much that he was the liaison on the Hillary Clinton campaign hack saga. And this guy, Mark, as we're going to see, this credential drop, this slow drip of credentials. Oh, Mark, you weren't just a Hillary Clinton flunky, were you? No. You also worked for Kerry campaign. Yeah, I did. You also worked for the Obama campaign. Yeah, and you had a partner who was also there with Kerry and Clinton and Bill Bradley, and you've been working with the DNC for a long time. And you've been around the block for years. And once she became the presumptive nominee, right, the DNC was acting to support Hillary. Their interests were aligned. And that's why when they ended up bringing you on. And once you got involved, the defense says, "I want to give you the opportunity to have a conversation or tell us sort of what was going on in your mind." Now, when I was going through this was last night, I believe, I wrote this down, okay? Open-ended questions on cross, right? And I want to pause on this briefly. And this goes back to the earlier point I was making at the start of this video, that these witnesses are essentially flopped, okay? Marc Elias now is being cross-examined by the defense. And if you've been watching any other trial, typically these are adversarial conversations. In a cross-examination, they teach you in law school and at every other CLE that you don't ask questions that are open-ended. You don't just say, just tell me what's on your mind, sir, about this, because it's adversarial. You don't want to let the witness get out of control and just start running their mouths about whatever, because it's an adversarial witness. So you ask close-ended questions. Isn't it true? And isn't it true? And isn't it true? Just like we've seen, I'm sure I haven't watched almost any of it, but my understanding is there's some very aggressive cross-examining going on in the Hollywood trial. And so in there, right, they're not friendly. They're not asking open-ended questions, but they are in this case because they're friendly. Let me show you what I mean by an open-ended question. Here, the defense attorney is going against Marc Elias, but since they're both on the same team, he's going to say, "Was there anything in your mind that you'd like to tell us about? With respect to this particular campaign, the Clinton versus Trump campaign, were there any particular concerns relative to litigiousness that were in your mind?" And look at this. This is all Mark's answer. Everything that I'm highlighting here is Mark's big open-ended paragraph. Now, if this were any other trial, right, you'd end it with a close-ended question. Isn't it true? Yes, I have nothing to say about that. You're done talking now. I got the answer that I needed. But because these two people are friendly, he gives him the floor. Was there anything on your mind? He says, yeah. Can you explain? Right, that gives him the floor. What do you want? Go for it, Mark. It's yours. You know, it's a matter of public record, says Mark. So I'm not going to go into privilege, but it was a matter of public records that Donald Trump had been infamously litigious. He had, as I recall, sued an author for saying he was not as rich as Donald Trump claimed to be. And he had in the primary election threatened to sue like, Marco Rubio and Guacbol Jeb Bush. And I think Kasich, like Donald Trump, he says, this is Marc Elias, like Donald Trump was a bully who used litigation as a tactic, both to threaten and also to bring litigation as a way to try to intimidate his opponents, whether it be in business or in politics. Okay? So remember the jury that they're talking to. This is a Washington, D.C. jury where 3 people that we have records on have confirmed to have voted for Democrats. So he's speaking directly to the jury. Donald Trump was a bully. All the jurors are like, yeah, right on. Yeah, he's Putin's puppet. Yeah, all right. They all remember this like night and day. And the defense is setting him up to just say, perfect, let me just crack this one right out of the park. Boom. And he got it. So the defense says, and in connection with your counseling to the campaign, you hired a firm called Fusion, right? Is that unusual in your experience here, Mark? To work with a consultant in a campaign? And he says, no, it's not unusual at all. And how do we know that that's legitimate? Well, because he says that, I've worked for Kerry and I've worked for Obama and this is Hillary and all. That's pretty good defense work from the defense team. Now, I think the court at one point, I highlighted this, called him Mr. Jaffe, something. I'm not real sure why that was. But the defense continues with Elias, says, you were outside general counsel, weren't you, for a busy campaign? Hillary was going to win, right? He says, yes, I was busy. And you had a law practice independent of your work for the campaign, right? He says, absolutely. Okay, now these are the close-ended questions. See this? This is how a regular cross-examination works. Correct? Correct? Yes. Correct? Absolutely. So he goes back to that. I think you testified, among other things, you had a big calendar, correct? Yes. Pretty busy during this time, right? Very. A wide-ranging scope of topics, huh? Absolutely. Those are close-ended questions. The other one was not, because he wanted to give him the floor to crack a bat and hit it against Trump. Interacting with, hundreds of people during this period, he says, oh, easily. And we've been talking about specific meetings like bullet points, like 0.2 hours and 1.5 hours and things of that nature. This happened a long time ago, right? He says, yes. And so, of course, here's where it comes out. Defense attorney says, is your memory fuzzy with respect to specific issues? Marc Elias says, very. Oh, yeah, he just can't remember any of those meetings. It was so long ago, and he's a busy guy. So they go back talking about more non-privileged information. And at this point, the prosecutor and the defense, they're sort of, when you're doing this, you just kind of take notes on all the points. The prosecutor's going through a list of bullet points. The defense is just, okay, he's on this bullet point now. Let me write my questions about that bullet point or cross-examine on that bullet point. And they're just going down the list. And so it's kind of like a call and response, just linear, direct, and then cross-exam. But we see the defense attorney tells us, let's take a look. Let me ask a different question. At some point back in the summer of 2016, did candidate Donald Trump make any statements about the hack? And look at this other big open-ended question right here. Look at this paragraph. It's beautiful. And this is good. This is really good. And the prosecutor is just kind of probably asleep over there. Says, what do you recall him saying and when? Donald Trump made a public statement. What did you hear him say about this? Marc Elias is like, perfect. I wrote this whole thing out last night. I practiced it 3 times in the morning this morning, and I'm ready. Put me in, coach. He's queued up. Answer from Mark. There was a publication of emails, of DNC emails, in the days leading up to the Democratic National Convention. And it was, in my opinion, at the time, clearly an effort by Russia to ruin what is the one clean shot that candidates get to talk to the American public. He says, right? Question mark. Probably looking at the jurors. He says the networks give you free coverage for your convention. And these emails just leaked. Marc says, and in the days before the convention, there was a major leak. And rather than doing what any decent human being might do and condemn it, Donald Trump said, I hope Russia is listening. And if so, we'll find the 30,000 Hillary Clinton emails that he believed existed and release them. Marc says, that's what I remember. And it's like an Oscar performance. Oh my, well done there, Marc. And so this prosecutor is now, I'm sorry, this is the defense attorney. This is the defense team now. After that big open-ended question says, Marc, did you feel the campaign was under attack, sir? Marc says, we absolutely were under attack. So what that means is since his incompetent party leaked their own emails out or, had no security in their emails, and Donald Trump was making a joke about it, that's an attack on their campaign. Give me a stinking break. Okay. So we're absolutely under attack. What is he doing here? What is this defense attorney doing? They're making arguments to the jury. The jury's like, I remember that clearly. I remember when Donald Trump and old Putin, we had Stephen Colbert making jokes about all this. And they can empathize with it. They just go, yeah, that sounds about right. That's exactly how I remember this too. We were under attack. And so if you're under attack, if you're in the fog of war, if you think your country is being taken over by the Russians, by Donald Trump, you have to act, don't you? Michael Sussmann had no choice but to take this stuff over to the FBI because he was working at Perkins Coie right next to Marc Elias, and they were under attack. And Michael Sussmann knew this because he had all the emails. He was involved of the email hack in the first place, right? As the FBI made him the liaison when they were investigating this thing. And the jurors are just clapping like seals. Oh, 100%. Absolutely. We know, we lived this. We live in DC. And Marc says, this was public. And he just goes on, look at this, a whole nother statement. This was public. Donald Trump, the Republican Party historically has been very anti-Russia. Ronald Reagan was like anti-communist and the most anti-Soviet Union president. And all of a sudden you have this guy who becomes the nominee and they changed the Russian National Committee, which is a political rant. I mean, this prosecutor's just sitting here like, go on, Marc. Yeah, whatever you say, and become a pro-Russian. And he has all kinds of things to say about Putin. And then he makes this statement. And in the meantime, he has hired, Paul Manafort, who is, I think has some ties to, I don't recall anymore, but it was some pro-Russia thing in Ukraine. What relevance is this of anything? Did he bring this up in the direct exam? I don't know. But he's filling in all the gaps. So yeah, I thought it was plausible. I didn't know. I thought it was an unusual set of circumstances. I thought it was plausible that Donald Trump had relations with through his company in Russia. Maybe he asked him about Paul Manafort that I missed. I don't know. But it's a whole political statement, not a cross-examination. This is just giving Marc the podium. And is it against the backdrop that you learned of the potential all through this time frame, Trump server? Asking about the redirect. Now something happens. So we're going to skip down here. They wrap up the cross-exam and it's quite good. It's not really a cross-exam. It's more like a direct exam. It's like the defense is questioning their own witness. But we see they're now talking about John Podesta and documents going back and forth, emails back and forth. Here we see near the middle of this transcript that the defense asks him, you testified you became aware that Sussmann went to the FBI, didn't you? Yeah. And your testimony was that you think that you were told right after, although there's a possibility it was right before, right? So Sussmann told you he was going before or after. To your recollection, which of those is it? He says it's after. Did you tell him to go to the FBI? No. Did he seek your permission to go to the FBI? No. Did you authorize him to go to the FBI? No. Did anybody in the Clinton campaign authorize him? No, not that I'm aware of. Did you consent? Not that I remember. And so what they're doing here, of course, is they're trying to make the argument that Sussmann actually didn't go on behalf of a client. So there's many different ways this isn't a lie. One, it's not a material lie, right? It doesn't matter whether he was there on behalf of a client. If that doesn't matter, then maybe it's not a crime. Sort of like a white lie rather than a lie. The other is that he actually did not go there on behalf of a client. He wasn't lying. He wasn't there on behalf of a client. That billing thing was just a mistake. That's all it was. Nobody authorized him. Clinton campaign, Perkins Coie, Marc Elias, nobody. He just did it on his own because he is a good citizen. That billing thing is just an aberration. Just one of those things that just doesn't belong there. And so we get the rest of the cross-exam and it wraps up. We get a little bit of an interesting thing that happens on the redirect. And so I want to show you that. Here's the redirect now. We see Berkowitz wraps up. Mr. Sussmann didn't seek your consent or knowledge from anybody in the campaign to give them information on September 19th, right? To the best of my recollection, no. So Berkowitz considers that to be his mic drop and he leaves. All right, nothing further. They take a quick break. We come back for a redirect. Now, I want to show this briefly because this is the basis of the motion to dismiss. So the defense filed a motion for a mistrial. It wasn't a motion to dismiss. It was a motion for a mistrial, or in the alternative to, I think, void the transcript. We'll see what it is. But here, I want to show you what happened. Okay, so if we frame this out, Marc Elias is still on the stand. They had a break. They come back. Government went first. Prosecutors asked him questions. The defense did a cross-examination. Prosecutor comes back for a redirect, which is really like a re-cross-examination kind of. And it gets a little bit hairy here. Now, here's why I want to, there's a couple of objections that are sustained. In other words, the prosecutor kind of screwed up and the judge is considering a mistrial on this. And it's about that very important issue that we communicated about at the start of the show, right? You're right against self-incrimination. If Michael Sussmann wants to sit there and not say a damn thing, he's free to do that. And you can't comment on that. It's a very powerful thing. We maintain that line hard. And so if somebody starts to comment on that, well, I don't know. You'd have to ask Sussmann, right? I don't know. Good question. That's a good question for what if a witness says, somebody says, hey, sir, do you know the answer to this question? No, I don't. Maybe you should ask that guy. And the jurors are sitting here going, it's a good point. Why don't you ask that guy? Well, now they're thinking in their heads that maybe they should impute some negative connotations to the fact that that guy is not getting up and explaining himself. It's going to be very careful with this. So we get back into the redirect and we can see here, Mr. DeFilippis, the prosecutor, starts. Mr. Elias, I think when the defense Berkowitz asked you about on whose behalf Mr. Sussmann may have gone to the FBI, you indicated that something that would be in Mr. Sussmann's knowledge. See that? Something that would be in Mr. Sussmann's knowledge. He could answer that. Was that the essence of your, and Berkowitz is like, oh, perfect. Mr. Sussmann's knowledge, objection. And he stands up, he's doing cartwheels, objection, Your Honor. The court's like, yeah, totally sustained on that one. Bummer. And DeFilippis is like, oh, shoot. He says, let me try that one again. Mr. Elias, how did you respond when you were asked about whether Mr. Sussmann went to the FBI on behalf of the campaign? How did you respond when you were asked about whether Mr. Sussmann went to the FBI? Objection, and again, sustained. So they're not asking, it's closer on that one, but they're asking same sort of question. That is sort of getting into some legal, how did you respond? Yeah, okay. So the judge sustains the objections. Those two questions not allowed. Move on. Mr. Elias then is sitting there and the prosecutor says, okay, sir, a little bit screwed up there. Let me start this over again. Sir, what is the best way to determine what an attorney is billing? What client? And he says, excuse me. He's flustered a little bit. Let me start that over again. He says, what is the best way to determine on what, on whose behalf an attorney is spending his time other than by asking him? Mark says, I was going to say, just ask him. He says, other than that. He says, I mean, billing records are good. Reasonable way to go because lawyers track what they're doing. Right? He's trying to say, how can we connect the two dots? I just hit myself in the face. How can we connect the two dots up here? The actual legal work and the bill. How do we connect the two? Billing records. Yeah, it's a pretty good way to do it. And so they're going to, go back in on that a little bit. And I think that about does it for, let's see if I highlighted anything else. Yeah. Prosecutors asking about, work split between the campaign and split for the firm. Got it. Now, Mark, you were asked some questions about news stories and whether the campaign would have wanted there to be a news story. Are you aware, Mark, of instances where the existence of an FBI investigation actually prompts news stories? And there was somebody who asked a question about this in the comments. I apologize. I can't remember the name of who you are, but it's a good question. It's like, why would Michael Sussmann and Perkins Coie and the Hillary people be trying to play both sides, right? Why would they go and be meeting and encouraging Fusion GPS to meet with these journalists while simultaneously taking these white papers and going and meeting with the FBI? Why? Because the FBI, if they're involved, right, wouldn't they try to stop that story from coming out? Because it might be an issue of national security. So they actually wouldn't publish it if the FBI is involved. Well, maybe, but they did it in a way so that the FBI, the allegation that there was a continuing investigation, they would take that. They would say, look, the FBI is looking at this, Mr. Journalist. If the FBI is looking at this, it must be legitimate, because the people who were looking at it, many of them were saying, oh, it's kind of questionable here. And then they said, oh, the FBI is looking into it. Oh, well, if they're looking into it, then it must be legitimate. So he's asking about that. Are you aware where the existence of the FBI actually, an investigation actually prompts the stories? And Mark says, yeah, absolutely. Of course I am. I mean, of course he is. He did it. He was involved in it. Yeah. So I know all about it. That's not what he means, of course, but it's true. Question from the prosecutor. Is it sometimes the case that when the FBI is investigating something, a reporter is more likely to publish it because they can say the FBI, and then Mark just jumps in? Yes. He says yes. He's excited. He knows how this works because he just got done doing it in 2016. He remembers it. Indiscernible line from the prosecutor. Court clerk couldn't hear that. The reporter. And she says, court report, Lisa says, I'm sorry, guys, I missed the last part of your question, counsel. Repeat it. And so prosecutor says, because they can say the FBI is investigating. They take the story, they say the FBI is investigating, and then they run it over to the media. The media runs with it because they think it's legitimate. Mark says, yeah, that's my fault. I jumped in before you were finished. And they go through and they detail a little bit more about that. Mark has another big answer. And we have another conference here. Berkowitz, the defense, objects. Your Honor, says, I think it goes to the motion. Public statements. Oh, yeah. So this is the tweet. Remember, Hillary Clinton published a tweet. The tweet is on the mind map. The tweet is on the mind map over on the issues forum here. This was the Hillary Clinton tweet that was excluded. The prosecutor and the defense are arguing over whether that tweet can come in. The court says, steer clear of the tweet. And the prosecutor says, all right. Yes, sir. And he moves on. We get near the end of the transcript for Elias. So this is coming to the end of Mark. And then we'll jump into Baker. We've got half of this sort of transcript left for Baker. And then we'll pick up Baker today. But Mark wrapped up. This is on the redirect. Says, now to your knowledge, Mark, Fusion GPS was not going to participate in the briefing. Rodney Jaffe would not have been briefed. My recollection is that the FBI's effort to make it seem like they were doing something was to weaponize against a presidential election. Let me repeat, I didn't go. Thank you very much, Mr. Elias. And that's it, right? So Mark's excused. Nothing really coming out of that other than really, I think, what we laid out earlier, the difference between Mark not remembering anything. What matters more? Mark not remembering anything and using that as an excuse to say that maybe that's all legitimate? Or do you think that all of those invites, all of those calendars, all of the lacking of memory is problematic for his credibility? I think I would probably be in the latter, but we'll see how the DC jury responds to this. Let's take a quick pause and give some shout outs to some of those super chats that came in. So thank you everybody for this. Here we had Elaine Smith. We had Marvin. Oh, here they're popping up over here today. This is amazing. Okay. Thank you, everybody. These transcripts are a pretty penny, but I do appreciate the support. Chris DeBayer says, really appreciated your run through chain of control on day 2. Well, thank you, Chris. Yeah, we talked about the chain of custody, right? A gives it to B, B gives it to C, C gives it to D. And if they have the thumb drives that just show up on somebody's desks, you kind of want to know where those came from. Just Cause in the house says Transcript Fund plus a sub and a like. That's a very nice one. Thank you, Just Cause. We had Tom Conwell. Great job, Robert, from Glenn Talman. Elaine Smith with the super chat. Thank you, Elaine Smith. Marvin Mestanza. Linda Diaz with the super chat, all for the Transcript funds. Thank you, everybody, for those. Malamute Aerospace with 2 says, release the hounds. Great work and God bless. Julie Rooch says, Robert, I'm still curious about the jury. Did Durham use all his strikes? Is the jury all Clinton supporters? Good question. So we'll spend a quick minute on this before we jump into Baker, and I'll just sort of summarize some of these questions. But here, on the mind map, let me give you a quick overview on the jury because it is a good question. It's not all, Hillary voters. Now, there's 12 people who are ultimately going to be selected on the jury, but there are 2 people that I don't really have information on that I couldn't glean out of the transcripts. But we have a teacher, a gymnast. We have a Treasury Department person who's also a DNC primary donor. He posted this, said this. Did you donate to somebody? He said, I think I did. I don't remember who. If it was somebody, it would have been on the Democratic side. Okay, so that's one of three that I think are left-leaning strongly. We have a medical illustrator, nothing to glean. We have a Hillary lawyer, which might be juror number 5, who is the person that they're trying to get booted. Definitely a Hillary donor. She, in my opinion, should have been booted, but she was not. Said, I think you likely donated to Hillary Clinton. If I did, that's who it would have been, she said. We had the Elden Ring guy. Elden Ring guy's 25-year-old who loves Elden Ring and video games. We have a mechanic. We have a Smithsonian. The Smithsonian historian is an art person who has a strong dislike for Trump. This is probably the most politically anti-Trump person that exists. A Smithsonian strong dislike for Trump. I had several clips here. This woman should have, I think, absolutely not been on the panel. Said, you strongly dislike Trump and that you are not sure you could be impartial, is what she said. Like, she wrote this in her form. Yeah, if this was someone on his team or something, then she couldn't be impartial. So Mr. Keelty, the prosecutor, says, so this is not, Trump's not in here. You'll hear their names, but you're going to hear about their campaigns. But based on, so the prosecutor's almost like rehabilitating her. Can you still judge Mr. Sussman's guilt or innocence? Oh, based on what you said, yes, I think I could be impartial. No, you can't. You hate Trump. And Sussmann is team anti-Trump. He's on your team, lady. So we've got somebody else whose father worked for a senator. This is the only person that has a hint of any Republican in them. Father worked for Senator Corker, I believe it was. Yeah, Senator Corker, Republican. And the grandfather worked in the CIA. So the CIA is there. We have the Peace Corps. Of course, they're not going to be, Republicans, that person, and a government contractor who, of course, is probably also a lefty. So 3 out of the 10 that I have information on are definitely left. And remember, you only need basically one not guilty, one holdout in order for this thing to not be a conviction. So that's K. Bean. How many of the jury would have to say guilty? All of them, unanimous, all of them. So they just need the one to not convict. Yeah, it'd be a hung jury if they can't come to an agreement. So you just need that one Smithsonian lady who just says, no, I know my history. And the answer is no. Donald Trump's going to take over America. So not too good, not too good. But that's what happens out of DC. And what makes this worse, right? If you want to compare other cases where the government loses, where the Department of Justice loses, it's when they have really bad witnesses, like exactly what happened with the Governor Whitmer kidnapping plot. They lost it all, right? Because they had terrible witnesses. Their witnesses that they were calling to incriminate these other people were like, no, they didn't do it. What are you talking about? It's the same thing here, right? Even though we all know it's like the government is calling people from the opposite team to try to rat out the other team. It's going to be difficult to do. We'll see how it goes. But thank you, everybody, for those super chats. KNT here, Malamute Aerospace, Julie Ruck, and Krista Bayer, Linda Diaz, Marvin Mestanza. Over on locals, we've got people chatting away over there. We've got Facts Matter, Tree Mendes is in the house, Vienticus Prime, JC the Music Man, and Ken Innit over there chatting away. And so I appreciate it, my friends. And by the way, also, if you happen to know anybody in the state of Arizona who has been charged with a crime our mission at our law firm, which covers all sorts of criminal cases in every single court in the state of Arizona, we would love to speak with you. We would love the opportunity to see if there's anything we can do to help you with your case. We have an amazing team of people who do an awesome job, and I trust them so much that I can spend time here with you because I know they're doing a great job on these cases. And so our phone number is in my link tree down in the description below. You can schedule online, and your referrals help keep us busy, and I very much appreciate that. So without any further ado now, we are into day 4. This is the morning session, May 19th, Thursday, U.S. of America versus Michael Sussmann. These are the transcripts coming out. And as we saw, we left off with James Baker, who was the FBI former general counsel. Wait, is that right? Where did we just leave off? No, we didn't. Here is where we're at. So let me just get my bearings straight. We did not leave off on James Baker. That was Marc Elias that we just finished up with. Now we're going to James Baker. Okay. So they have lunch. And did Mr. Sussmann go to the FBI? Hang on a second. Where am I? I'm all discombobulated now. All right. So they go to lunch. They come back. And they start. They only have a couple hours left in the afternoon session. I forgot. Okay, so they finish. They have a couple arguments. They finish. They start with James Baker, and then they finish James Baker this morning of today. All right. And James Baker, the reason I'm so confused is because we have a lot of James Baker. James Baker is not done. He was all day today, morning and afternoon. And James Baker is also going to be, I think, early tomorrow morning. So we've got like almost 2 full days of James Baker, and that is a lot. So I wanted to just make sure that I was oriented properly since we're doing all of this on the fly. Okay, so they left off with lunch. They come back. We talked about that little bit of a problem. The next witness is called. It's going to be James Baker, but we got a little bit of an issue. Berkowitz says, we got to come back and talk about those questions from DeFilippis. And they do. They go to lunch. They come back. And Berkowitz is now up. He's Mr. Sussmann's defense lawyer. Says, look, Judge, I'm really sorry, but you know those questions that the prosecutor asked Marc? Those are problematic. Those encroached on his right to remain silent. But I got to bring it up. He says, look, it's not something I'm interested in doing, but I want to take the time and ask for a break so we can consider what to do in light of not just the witness's testimony, okay? Not just what Elias said, but also DeFilippis's first 2 follow-up questions that commented on Sussmann's testimony or his failure to testify that was implied, at least. I think we need to talk about this, about whether we will be moving for a mistrial in light of those things. Court says, so you'll let me know tomorrow? Like you'll file a motion? Berkowitz nods his head in the affirmative. Mr. DeFilippis, says the prosecutor, they're going to file a motion for a mistrial because you just screwed up. What do you have to say about this, sir? He says, Your Honor, I just want to put on the record the defense had informed us last evening that they were, in reviewing the grand jury testimony of Mr. Elias, that they asked the government to be careful not to elicit testimony that would elicit whether Elias, there was a comment in his grand jury testimony where he answered essentially the same way. Okay, when he was in a prior proceeding, Elias said something like, I don't know, you'd have to ask Sussmann. So prosecutor says it was the defense in this instance, which was Sussmann's people, who elicited that answer from Marc. The defense got him to say something like, you'll have to ask Sussmann. The government came back to this issue. They say it's an issue of relevance, which was the meeting with the FBI. They spoke to Mr. Elias's perception of Sussmann and who he was, but he would know to answer that question. So he says, I just want to note for the record, we're being very careful. And so the court, in the meantime, the judge is like sitting back there already rummaging through these records, says, I already pulled the transcript, actually. We'll deal with this tomorrow if you raise it, defense, but I just pulled the transcript in the meantime because those court clerks are rapid. The question on the cross was, this is the question from the defense, says, to your knowledge, did Mr. Sussmann go to the FBI on September 19th on behalf of the Hillary Clinton campaign? That's what the defense asked Marc. And the first part of Mark's answer was, I think, non-responsive to Mr. Berkowitz's question. So I don't think that the defense elicited the response. So I'm not saying that they did that. He says, I think it was somewhat gratuitous or unnecessary. And the prosecutor's like, no, Your Honor. He kind of interrupts him a little bit. According to this court clerk, the judge is still talking and he cuts him off. No, Your Honor, I wasn't suggesting it was gratuitous. I was saying the government was careful to avoid that in its direct. It wasn't the government that prompted the response. I just wanted to be clear on that, okay? I didn't screw this up. Please don't grant a mistrial on this, all right? I'm freaking out enough as it is, so just leave it. So the judge says, all right, well, look, defense, I'll leave it to you to decide what you want to request, and that's it from me. Is the jury ready? Says, yes, jury's ready. All right, and so now it turns over to DeFilippis. Government calls James Baker, who now takes the stand. He's sworn in, raises his right hand, takes a seat. Oh, good afternoon there, Mr. Baker. Where do you work currently? Well, I currently work at Twitter. And look at this. He's a lecturer on the law at Harvard Law School. Oh, great. And what's your position at Twitter? He says, I'm the deputy general counsel and the vice president. And he was interrupted. He did all sorts of stuff. And what year did you start with the FBI over there, Jim? 2014. As general counsel? Yep, as general counsel. And what did you do? All sorts of things. I managed 200 lawyers and 100 professionals and all this other stuff. And you were also involved at the DOJ, the Department of Justice. Yeah, 1996 to 2007. All this background. Do you have any security clearances? Yeah. Top secret level, the highest levels. Yeah. Sensitive compartmented information as well. Yeah, I get it all. Got counterterrorism, counterintelligence, all that stuff. We deal with domestic threats. And and they do a lot of work, right? Is your daily work at the FBI? Which officials at the FBI did you deal with most frequently? And he tells us all about them. High-ranking officials, counterintelligence, counterterrorism, international matters. All right, thanks for all that background there, Jim. Let me ask you about 2006. To the best that you recall, who was the director at the FBI? Oh, James Comey. And you dealt with him on a regular basis? Yes, I did. A lot of other people that he dealt with regularly, including Michael Sussmann. Prosecutor asks him, how did you get to know Mr. Sussmann? Says, I think I knew Michael when he worked at the DOJ, but I certainly got to know him better, and he became friends with him. And became friends with him, I remember, at the funeral of a friend of his and a friend of mine who was both a mentor to both of us. And then after that point, I remember Michael and I keeping in frequent contact with each other, checking in. So we would have friendly interactions. And then he also did work with the Bureau and the department. And so I had interactions with him on a professional basis as well. How many years overlapped when you were at the DOJ? I don't remember. I don't know. How about other places? I don't remember. But we did keep in touch irregularly. And prosecutor says, how would you characterize your relationship? Would you consider yourself colleagues or friends? Something in between? He says both. And they continue talking about their different positions. Somebody left the DOJ. And the prosecutor asks him, all right, Mr. Baker, what, if anything, did you know about any work that Sussmann did for political clients or politically affiliated clients? Might be people like Hillary or the DNC. Well, at some point in time in 2016, I learned that he was representing the DNC and Hillary Clinton. So at some point in 2016, we don't know. I mean, certainly the meeting at the FBI, the allegation was that at that time, that meeting was not about campaign work or some sort of campaign cyber-related incident and so on. But I understood him to represent those clients in connection with cyber matters, not political matters. Prosecutor says, and if you could just, Mr. Baker, could you set the scene for us a little bit more at the FBI during that period? Were those hacks prominent on the FBI's radar? Oh yeah, they were very prominent. Everybody was freaked out about them. I wasn't involved in the day-to-day stuff as a line prosecutor, and I never met Mr. Sussmann on any of these matters. Was there a time in 2016 when Sussmann provided you with some information in your capacity at the FBI, right? This is all the good stuff now. Yes, there was a time. And when was that approximately? Jim, that was the September of 2016. And how did Mr. Sussmann first reach out to you in connection with that information? He sent me a text on my personal cell phone seeking to set up a meeting with me. Where were you when you got that text? Well, to the best of my recollection, I was at my house. Daytime, nighttime. It was in the evening. I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 1500. Look there. Do you recognize this? This looks like a screenshot of my personal phone, of part of my personal phone. And do you have any awareness as to how this screenshot came into the possession of the government? That's us. Well, at some point in time, I took a screenshot of it and I gave it to the government. We moved to introduce this as an exhibit, and they do. What is this? It's a screenshot of my current phone. When you go in there, this is how you get it. They flip forward to a text message on September 18th. Mr. Baker, what are we looking at here on this thing? Put it up on the screen for the jurors. This is a text message from my iPhone. Well, it's an iMessage technically, and it's a message that I got on September 18th, 2016 at 7:24 p.m. And there's the text. Do you want me to read the text? Sure. Thank you. Jim Baker's in court doing his best Michael Sussmann impression. Jim, it's Michael Sussmann. I have something time sensitive and sensitive in parentheses I need to discuss. Do you have availability for a short meeting tomorrow? I'm coming on my own, not on behalf of a client or company. Want to help the Bureau. Thanks. Oh, yeah, we've read that many times. It's in the mind map under the Michael Sussmann, Jim Baker connection. Here, I think we have the text. Yeah, it's right here under the first item. Sussmann to Baker text. That was introduced in one of the discovery documents. And here we see not on behalf of a client or company, okay, even though he billed Hillary for it, allegedly. So the prosecutor says, okay, thanks for reading that out loud to the jurors here. But we're going to come back to that. And it took a long time for them to get this, and they talk about all sorts of different materials and code. And there was a phone call with the government, discovery-related matters. He started looking for the texts, downloading from the cloud, met with the government previously about this. So talking about how the text really came about. Based on your recollection alone, when you thought back to your meeting with Sussmann, did you remember specifically that this text message had come in, or did you think that he had contacted you in some other way? I had not recalled that he texted me until I saw this text in March. So I kind of forgot about that original text. Now, they go back to the original message. The date of this was what? September 18, 2016. What day was that? He says, I think it was a Sunday. And did you testify earlier where you were? Yeah, I was at home, and you received this text message. What was your reaction to this? Well, I was a bit surprised, honestly, to get it from Michael. I kind of wondered how he got my personal cell phone number, which he kind of said they were friends earlier. But Michael's a friend, so it didn't really freak me out. Okay, there you go. So, okay, all right. Michael wants to meet. He's thinking, I trust Michael. I'll set up a meeting with him if he can come tomorrow. It seems, based on what he was saying, it seemed to me at the time it was very important. So I thought I should meet with him right away. So let's look at what, if any, response you sent to him. Shall we, Mr. Baker? So, Mr. Baker, you wrote back. Sir, can you put that up on the screen? It looks like you wrote back, Mr. Baker. What did you say? He says, I said, okay, we'll find a time. What might work for you? Sussmann responded, anytime but lunchtime. You name it. Because lunchtime's for eating. And then your response, he says, so I think I probably looked at my calendar on my phone, on my bureau phone, and suggested 2 p.m. at my office. So the meeting's scheduled. And what happens next? Well, we've got a lot. And I asked him if he had a badge to get into the FBI headquarters, or did he need my help getting into the building? Obviously, says Jim, people can't just walk out of the street into FBI headquarters. There's a whole process for somebody getting in. But for some reason, I thought that Michael, because he did a lot of business with the Bureau, might have a security badge, which in fact turned out that he did, because he said, I have a badge. Please remind me your room number. Don't worry about me. I can just go anywhere I want in the FBI because I'm working for Hillary. And then you can see sort of at the bottom, I gave him my room number, 7427 FBI headquarters. Prosecutor wants to summarize this overall text chain. I don't see any text messages from Sussmann earlier. When he went back on your phone, was this the first message from him? He says, yeah, I think it was the first. Looks like you gave me your office number, right? Your Honor, this might be a logical time to stop. And they stop, right? Court, ladies and gentlemen, it's 5 o'clock now. This is yesterday. We're going to break. We're going to continue with Mr. Baker tomorrow. We're going to break a little bit early today. You're going to be excused. Come back tomorrow at 9 a.m. Fortunately, we're going to fast forward through the evening and jump right into it. But Mr. Baker steps down, And Berkowitz says, just briefly, I know it's late, Judge, but we're going to move for a mistrial tomorrow. So should we be prepared to argue it? And he says, yeah, you should be prepared to deal with that and deal with witnesses. Says, I'm not inclined to grant a mistrial over that Sussmann question. And so you better be prepared to come. Vague estimate from the prosecutor, 2 hours on the defense. We're adjourned for the night. Be safe. And shout out to Lisa Edwards, who did an excellent job transcribing this. The best court reporters, the best reporters that exist. And so they went home, went to bed, woke up this morning, and boom, they're back. 9:09 a.m. Morning session, May 19th, 2020. Michael Sussmann still under the gun here with a trial looming over him. And here's how it starts. We've got, I think I had some photos here. Let's, yes. So I was able to add a couple photos earlier. The proceedings start. It's bright and early, 9:09 in D.C. And guess who's up now? Miss Brittany Shaw. Good morning, Your Honor. Court says, good morning. I'm here. I'm joined by my co-counsel. Berkowitz stands up. Good morning. I'm here too. And Berkowitz now wants to chime in on this motion for a mistrial. Your Honor. Oh, the court just addresses it. Mr. Berkowitz, I received your motion last night on the motion to strike. You want to be heard any further? Well, Judge, and he layers it on. Berkowitz really likes to lather it on thick. Your Honor, we very much appreciate your counsel. We had time to thoughtfully deliberate, and I think our motion speaks for itself. If you have questions, we're here to answer them for you. Court says, okay. You say that Mr. Sussmann hasn't made a decision to testify yet. Is he going to take the stand, yes or no? Is the motion conditional on that? I mean, if Sussmann's going to testify, maybe that changes the equation. Do we need to do anything if he chooses to testify? Berkowitz, the defense, says, no, I don't think so. All right. And the court says, okay, Mr. DeFilippis, Ms. Shaw? And Ms. Shaw says, it's me again, Judge, I'm afraid. Thank you, Your Honor. Court says, yeah, you're his counsel, right? Because he's in trouble because he kind of screwed up and caused the whole argument in the first place. So he's not really going to get up there and argument. Ms. Shaw's going to take the position and sort of try to paper over this whole thing. She's like, you dummy, I'll handle this. Just sit back over there and let me take this over. So she stands up and she says, all right. Court says, you're his counsel. And she says, I guess so by default, idiot. Your Honor, it would be the government's position that certainly the motion for a mistrial is not needed in this case. See what I'm doing for you? As Your Honor noted yesterday, this was a non-responsive answer to a question elicited by the defense counsel, and it would certainly be within the court's discretion to strike certain portions of that and perhaps make necessary instructions concerning the non-responsiveness, but I don't believe it rises to the level of anything that warrants a mistrial, Your Honor. So please don't do that. Looking at DeFilippis over there again with that side eye. And the court says, okay, the court will deny the defense's motion for a mistrial. And DeFilippis is just like, oh gosh, somebody give me a glass of water and an ice pack, because he is just, whoo, man, he's having a tough morning today. But the court says, to the extent it has made one, it is prepared to strike the non-responsive portions from the transcript. That is routine, that both parties can deal with this in opening and closing arguments, and so you can address it there at the end. But Brittany Shaw, the prosecutor, wants to chime in on a couple other things. Says, Your Honor, before we get started, during Mr. Baker's testimony, we want to offer our first stipulation about an instruction. Looks like they're talking about the notes, the recollection of the notes. Okay, so Baker, remember the notes issue? I don't want to spend a lot of time on the evidentiary stuff, but there was a notes issue. Okay, so this is Mr. Baker. Mr. Baker is the person with whom Sussmann had the meeting. He was there back in September of 2016. He didn't take any notes because these two buddies were just palling around all over the place and they didn't record anything. So he didn't take notes, but he did communicate about his meeting to these two people, Tricia Anderson, who at the time was Deputy General Counsel, so sort of number two under James Baker, and also Bill Priestep, who was the Deputy Director of the FBI under James Comey at the time. They did take notes. And so if you're following along on the mind map, which is down in the link tree description below, if you click that link, it'll take you right there. But they actually have their notes that they took. And in their notes, This one was from Trish. She wrote this on September 19th, says no specific client, but using a group of cyber academics. Okay, so she says that James Baker told her that Sussmann was not there on behalf of another client, and she memorialized that in her notes. Bill Priestep, same thing here. He took notes like a good FBI agent, and he says Michael Sussmann, attorney, Perkins Coie, said not doing this for any client, right? That's what was coming in. That was sort of through the game of telephone from James Baker. And so they're having an evidentiary conversation about all that here. Parties have been discussing these notes and the other set of notes. There's a whole other set of notes, which are the notes from the March 17th meeting. The March 17th meeting, really these notes are like double hearsay, but they are here if you want to look at them. This is when, after Donald Trump won the election, there was a meeting, wherever it was, between the incoming acting attorney general and many people from the FBI. Remember, Obama's on his way out. The Trump people are on their way in, and they're having meetings about this. And at that meeting, all of the notes changed. Suddenly, everybody remembered, oh yeah, Michael Sussmann told us conveniently that he was in fact here on behalf of a client. Sure. But the notes changed. And so the defense wants to use these notes, which of course look just like this. Attorney, in parentheses, in quotations, brought to the FBI on behalf of his client. 6 months after the actual meeting, after Trump won, after Trump tweeted, I know what you guys did, they started changing their notes. So, whatever. But they're fighting about this. No objections. There was a stipulation saying they want to show him the March 17 notes, and we'll see how it gets in. Talking about efficiency purposes, sounds great. Thank you for the cooperation. And so a lot of this stuff, right, we could spend time on it, but we'll just see it happen in the transcript. So we don't need to do that. We had a jury note that we gave to both sides. I may just hold her back at the break, see if we can talk to her about this. Anyone else? Nothing from counsel. Berkowitz needs a minute. Can we bring Baker back? And he's back. All right, we've got some confidential material. All right, we're back off here. Witness takes a stand. You're under oath as a reminder. Mr. Baker, says the prosecutor. When we left off yesterday, we were talking about an outreach that Sussmann made to you back on September 18th, 2016. Do you recall that, sir? Yes, I do. Put it up on the screen. Mr. Baker, you recall that text message you read yesterday? So he's getting that text up on the screen twice. Very nice. So that the jurors can see that. And you testified that you first retrieved this text message in the context of this matter a few months ago. Yeah, it's the best of my recollection. I've got an iPhone 13 Max. I looked for the emails. I looked for the text. I pulled them out of my iCloud on Apple. When you get a new phone at Apple, they transfer your stuff, right? Yeah. Please magnify the messages on September 18th. You responded after he sent that you're going to find time and you're going to schedule lunch at 2 p.m. So they're rehashing a lot of this stuff. Just to make sure the jury's back up to speed, right? Catching them up because they forgot all of this. And we learned that Sussmann was trying to get into the FBI building when you were there. You asked him if he had a badge. Tell me about the badge. Well, it's a plastic ID badge. Allows you to go through the security gates quickly. It's got different colors. FBI employees have a color. Contractors have a color. Different parties have different color badges. I don't know what color Michael's badge was, but he probably did have one. I believe the badge would have allowed him to walk right in. And so the prosecutor asks him, do you know of any particular reason why Sussmann needed regular access to the FBI? Well, I think he had, I don't know what the word is, a vibrant national security practice, something like that. So he interacted with the Bureau a lot. And I think somebody would have sponsored him to get a badge of this type. Okay. But he was not an FBI employee, right? No, he wasn't. And so he said, I have a badge. And you said, okay. And what happened next? The meeting would have been on the 19th, wasn't it? Yes, it did. This is the big meeting. This is the juicy stuff. And it did happen, as far as you remember, right around the scheduled time. Right, Jim? Yes. Let me show you Exhibit 240. What are we looking at here? Well, that's a record of my calendar. That would have been retrieved from the FBI computer. Yes, I did have an electronic calendar, and we moved to offer that as an exhibit. Jim, what does this say here on your calendar invite? It says, meeting with Michael Sussmann. Jim says it's got the start time, September 19, 2016, 2 p.m. End of September, 2:30 p.m. It says the time is busy on my calendar. And he says, it's not a recurring meeting. I was organizing it. I believe it would have been through my executive assistant, required the attendees within the FBI, nobody else, just me. And what floor is your office on there, Jim? 7th floor. Is the 7th floor also a term of art in the FBI? Yeah, it refers to the floor where the director and other senior executives live. And so when the people talk about the 7th floor, they talk about FBI leadership. Yes, they do. FBI headquarters located in D.C. And Mr. Sussmann came to you around that time. Yep. Did he go directly to your office or did you meet him somewhere else? No, I believe he just came right to my office. And who, if anybody, was with him, Jim? No other person was with him at the time. He had materials with him that he brought, but no other people were with him. Prosecutor says, well, okay, just describe your office for us and where this meeting happened. Jim thinks about it and says, the meeting happened in my personal office. So I have or had a personal office with my desk and a set of, there was a sofa, there were a couple of chairs. I had a sensitive compartmented information facility storage area for classified information adjacent to my office. And then there was an entryway or sort of an entry area where my executive assistant and a special assistant sat. And then across from them, I had another larger conference room with a big conference table. Sounds like a nice office. And so where did the meeting happen? The meeting took place in my personal office. Now, when Mr. Sussmann came in, did he have anything with him, Jim? Yeah, he had some written materials and some electronic media with him. And so how did the meeting begin? What happened? Michael came in and he started to explain why he was there. He said that he was not appearing before me on behalf of any particular client. Whoa, that's testimony now. That is a statement from a witness. And this is apparently a pretty credible witness. He's an ex-FBI general counsel person. One more time, Michael started to explain why he was there. He said that he was not appearing before me on behalf of any particular client. That's the lie. Whether you say it's a lie or not, like that's what they're saying the charge is right there. And that he had some information that was of concern relating to an apparent surreptitious communications channel between something called Alpha Bank, which he described as being connected to the Kremlin, and some part of the Trump organization in the US. And it looked like, according to some cybersecurity researchers, that Sussmann was in contact with, as if it were, again, some surreptitious way for these two entities to communicate with each other. Now, that's going to be, you're going to spend a lot of time on this, dissecting this from the cross, but that's the crux of this. Prosecutor says, perfect, exactly what I needed. Thank you for testifying in accordance with what I need to win my case. So the prosecutor asks him, as best you recall, how long did this last? About 30 minutes, give or take? Yeah, approximately 30 minutes. And Jim, you mentioned a statement that Mr. Sussmann said he was not doing this on behalf of a client. Did that statement occur towards the beginning of the meeting, the end, or somewhere in between? Jim says, I think it was pretty close to the beginning of the meeting. It was part of his introduction to the meeting. Prosecutor's nodding and looking at the jury saying, see? Asks him, now, Mr. Baker, different exhibit throws up on screen. You'll recall this is the message that Sussmann sent to you the night before. Is it your testimony that he repeated that statement in the meeting with you? Remember, the text message said, I'm not coming on behalf of a client. And Jim Baker says, in essence, yeah, I believe he said I'm in the meeting. He said, I'm not here on behalf of any particular client. Quote, and how confident, Mr. Baker, are you that he said that, repeated that in the meeting? Get ready. Here it comes. Jim Baker, answer. I'm 100% confident that he said that in the meeting. That is not good for the defense. The defense is now going to have to rebut that. They're going to try to make Jim, their original strategy was to make Jim Baker look like a big dum-dum, just like Marc Elias is. He can't remember anything. It was 6 years ago. All these meeting invites, all this complicated stuff happened in between. Poor Marc Elias just can't remember much, unfortunately. And they were going to say same thing should have happened with Jim. Jim just came out and said, nuh-uh, sorry about that, folks. I am 100% confident that he said that in the meeting. I'm not here on behalf of any particular client. And when he said that, Mr. Baker, what impression did that have on you? How did you respond, sir? Michael's a friend of mine, he says, and a colleague. And I believed it and I trusted that the statement was truthful. jumping in here myself, he's also saying, I also hated Donald Trump and I would have loved it to be true. And I would have loved this to all go badly for him. And so I didn't really press too hard on it, I'm sure. Prosecutor asks him, and where it says in the text message that you got the night before, want to help the Bureau. When you read that the night before, what did you understand that to mean? Jim says, well, that he was coming to me as a good citizen who had obtained some information that he wanted to share. Again, from the text of this, I had literally no idea what he was coming in about. But knowing Michael, I would expect that if he had information as a citizen, I think he would want to help the government. That's the kind of person I thought him to be. They are friends. And so he's talking him up. And when he repeated that statement in the meeting, did you come away with the same impression that he was acting as a good citizen? Yes, I did. So it was pretty material, right? He wasn't, as an FBI agent, right? So this kind of cuts both ways. Now, if you're a juror, you're listening to this, and maybe you're saying, well, this is Jim Baker being sympathetic to Michael Sussmann. We're friends, and he's saying that he was a good citizen. The defense is going to say, yeah, he was a good citizen. That's all true. And the defense is also going to argue that it's immaterial. It doesn't matter whether he was there on behalf of a client or not. That was a big part of their preliminary arguments in the motions in limine that we covered, saying that the FBI was going to investigate this regardless, whether he was actually there on his own or on behalf of Clinton. They would have looked into it because they had to. They're the FBI. But here he's believing, Jim Baker is communicating, I actually believe this, that he's actually a good citizen. So the prosecutor asks, now, in connection with these allegations, you said that Sussmann described the allegations of a secret communications channel between Trump and Russia. What did he say about where he got those allegations? Where did this come from? FBI agent Jim Baker says, he said, to the best of my recollection, he said that he'd been in contact or approached by some cybersecurity experts. And he said he is not going to identify them. But he said that there were some people that he named and who he thought that I either knew or knew of. And when you say that there were people like the people he named, what did you mean? Well, so he said again, says Jim, to the best of my recollection, he said there were people like Susan Landau, professor of cybersecurity, Steve Bellevin, professor on cybersecurity, somebody named Matt Blaze, another academic, all three of them very impressive in their fields. One of them is Susan. I knew her quite well. And you heard them all and you were familiar with them? He says, yeah, more or less. These are serious people in the field of cybersecurity, and I was communicating with them. What, if anything, did Sussmann say about people outside the FBI who were aware of these things? He said, well, some media organizations were aware of this material and these allegations, and that there were major news outlets, either like the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal, that may be publishing some of this. Did he say one way or the other that where he got this information from? I don't think he did. Do you have an understanding one way or another whether he says yes? He cuts him off. My impression was that the cybersecurity experts had given it to him, and that's what I recall when I was sitting there. Baker chimes back in and says the cybersecurity experts gave this material to whatever reporter or whatever news organization was. I didn't have the impression that Michael had given this information to the reporter. Okay, prosecutor says that's fine. Now, you testified there was an allegation of a secret channel between Russia and Trump. Is that right? Yes. Do you recall there being any other allegations about this other than what Sussmann conveyed? And we get a big statement here from Jim Baker. He says, let me explain this. 2 points. First, one, when Sussmann came in, he referenced something called Spectrum Health, which I understood to be some type of hospital or health system. And what I gathered from the conversation was, that somehow the communications from Alpha Bank were being sent through this Spectrum Health organization and then to the Trump organization to obscure the origin and the destination of the communications. And Baker says this is a fairly typical thing that malicious cyber actors do. They obscure what they are up to. They'll find an innocent, maybe an innocent or not innocent, but anyway, they find a third party to go through, sometimes multiple third parties, in order to make it difficult to trace them. He also talked about Tor, called the Onion Router. It's a publicly available methodology that people can use to hide their stuff. Any indication from Sussmann about the relationship between Tor? He said, well, I think he analogized Tor to something like, he's like, I don't recall if they were using Tor, something that looks like Tor, but something about alpha and the internet and a methodology of communications. Prosecutor says, great. Now, I want to go back to the reference to news media organizations about whether they plan to publish anything or anything like that. Did he say anything about that? What did Sussmann tell you about the media? Baker says, yes, he did. And what was that about? He says, well, my recollection is that he said that that the information that he, Michael, had, that the news organization was intent on publishing about something very soon. And when you heard him say that, what reaction did you have? How did that affect your view of the materials or the meeting? He said it was about to be published. What did that do to you? And Baker says, well, I mean, it affected the thinking of my urgency of this matter. It affected my thinking of the urgency because I know from my prior experience in this field that if a news organization were to publish something about an alleged surreptitious communications channel, it's likely that as soon as the article came out, the channel would disappear. And that would make it much harder for the FBI to investigate any of this stuff. The users would just do something different, whatever worked and had been done would not have been any use to the FBI. So it'd be harder to find what actually happened there. So they have an incentive to make sure that it doesn't get published until they get their bases in order so that they can go and conduct their law enforcement. Prosecutor says, all right, let's go back to Sussmann's texts. I have something time sensitive. How did the importance of this news article being published very soon impact you? He says, Baker writes or speaks, so if the FBI wanted to investigate this in the counterintelligence world, really in any part of the criminal law, but our criminal investigations, especially in counterintelligence world, you don't want the bad guys to know that you're looking at them. That's critically important. So if there's a news article, it's going to be trouble. And so, yes, based on what he was telling me, that seemed 100% accurate. That if a news article is going to be published, the FBI is going to move quickly because they want to stop that from happening. And you create this little synergistic relationship because now the FBI goes out to the journalists and don't you publish that. And they say, oh, it's real. I'm going to publish it, right? Or they're going to pass it off to somebody else who's going to publish it. And so both sides are being played against one another in order to make sure this thing moves forward. Prosecutor asks, Mr. Baker, in connection with the computer scientist who Mr. Sussmann referenced to you, did he describe them as clients or clients, client or clients? As I said earlier, no, he said the opposite, that he was not there on behalf of any particular client. Another bad statement for the defense on this. He's making it pretty unequivocal. 100% he was not there on behalf of a client. So now Sussmann's going to have to sort of dismantle that by saying that he really attacked the billing, I think is where this is going to go. Now, during this meeting, did Mr. Sussmann make any particular asks of you? Did he want you to do anything specifically? No, he didn't. And during that meeting, what, if anything, did you tell Sussmann about what you would do? Did you make any asks of him? Not during that meeting, he says. Well, he presented to me, he says, let me back up a little bit, Baker. Says he presented me a printed out copy of pages. I don't know how many pages, maybe half an inch thick or so. They were 8.5 by 11 pages clipped together with a binder clip. He also provided me with what I think was 2 or 3 thumb drives that had the same information on them. At least that's what I understood. So he presented that to me and I took that information, but he didn't ask me to do anything. He just said, take whatever action you think is appropriate. And he says, what's a thumb drive? And he explains what a thumb drive is. Now, when the meeting ended, is that when he handed this all over to you? He says, well, he may have passed them to me during the course of the meeting. I held them. I think I flipped through the pages, but I didn't really look at them in close detail. And it's probably true. They were only there for half an hour. He says, Mr. Baker, I think it was clear from your testimony, but who, if anyone, did you bring into the meeting? Nobody, just us two. Any reason for that? Well, I hadn't heard from his text saying it was time sensitive and sensitive. I had literally no idea what I was talking about. So I wanted to hear what he had to say first. I didn't want to bring anybody else in there who maybe shouldn't be hearing this stuff. He says, I didn't know who else it might pertain to. And if it didn't pertain to somebody in the Bureau, it could have been very sensitive. I really had no idea. So not knowing who else to bring in, I just didn't bring anybody else in. I didn't know if this was going to be something that needed counterterrorism or counterintelligence or any other entity. So I just went in there first. Prosecutor asks him, in your role as the top lawyer at the FBI, how common or uncommon is it for you to take in materials like this? Like, do you just meet with people and they just bring you thumb drives? Does that happen regularly? Was it a common occurrence? Asks the prosecutor. Baker says it was uncommon. Any reason for that? He says, well, look, I'm not a case agent, but having said that, the culture of the FBI is to work with the public to protect the public. So we have 1-800 numbers. We have tip lines. We have a variety of ways to take in info from the public. Further, taking info from the public is specifically authorized. There's a provision in our internal policies and all this. We want the public's assistance to protect national security, which is good for the defense. That's their story. That Sussmann was just so freaked out by everything that he saw going on in the news, Trump's taking over, blah, blah, blah. He had no choice but to act, which is probably what many of the jurors are going to agree with. So Baker is asked, you said the meeting lasted about 30 minutes. Yeah. And after that meeting, what, if anything, did you do to act on what Sussmann had told you? Baker says, to the best of my knowledge, immediately or within minutes, I placed a phone call to the person who's the head of one of the highest ranking officials over at the FBI, Bill Priestep. And first, asked the prosecutor, how confident are you that it was a phone call or would have been another type of call? I'm pretty sure it was a phone call. I could have gone down to his office, but I know I reached out to him quickly. And Bill's the head of counterintelligence? Yeah, assistant director, and they do all sorts of counterintelligence stuff. The FBI is responsible for, handling this stuff on a global basis to try to thwart threats and Russian foreign intelligence services and playing Where's Waldo, multiple times a day to try to capture the J6 insurrectionists. It's ridiculous. And the prosecutor asks, why was it that you thought these allegations were appropriate to bring over to Bill, who's counterintelligence? He says, well, it involved Russia and different allegations in the Kremlin and all sorts of stuff. So it could have been a potential security threat. The FBI at that point in time was already investigating allegations between Trump and Russia. And there was another set of allegations. And so some of this was just already in our wheelhouse. And with regard to the investigation, was that something that for you was a priority? He says, yeah, it was a very high priority. We were devoting considerable resources to the investigation. It was also a very sensitive investigation, so we have to be careful about who we talked about this with. Okay, very good. Let's go back to your conversation with Bill Priestep. What did you do with the physical materials, those thumb drives? Physical materials I held on my desk in my office for the moment. Then you interacted with Bill. He says, yeah, that's my recollection. I think it was a phone call because I still had the materials. What was the gist of that call? Bill says, the James Baker, FBI agent, says a couple things. When I called Bill, I first explained who Michael was. I identified him as Michael. He's a partner at Perkins Coie. I then explained a little bit about Perkins Coie, saying that they were a law firm I was familiar with. They've got a lot of substantial national security partners with substantial background there. Asked him to spell the name. Todd, somebody over who's a deputy assistant for the attorney general. Explaining more about Michael, he's talking to Bill. And what did you say about Michael? He says, well, I was trying to explain that Michael was, in essence, I was vouching for Michael. I was trying to explain Michael's a serious lawyer. He's a smart guy. He's got national security experience. He's somebody who could with cyber experience, somebody who could understand the importance and the validity of the information that's being brought to him by cybersecurity experts. This is all very good for the defense, right? This is making Sussmann look like highly qualified, totally legitimate thing for him to be doing. And look at this. James Baker's throwing shade at personal injury lawyers. Says, so Michael wasn't he wasn't a personal injury lawyer like those losers out there. Oh, man. So Michael wasn't a personal injury lawyer. Wasn't one of those ambulance chasers who's just trying to get your leg chopped off so they can get $1 million. I'm not a personal injury lawyer, so I'm not offended by that. But if I were, I might have a feeling about it. He says he was somebody who could understand the meaning of this cyber material. And therefore, when I received it, I took it seriously. And what did you tell Bill about whether Sussmann, about other clients Sussmann might have had anything to do with? He said, I repeated to Bill that Michael had said that he was not there on behalf of any particular client. He was there as a citizen, a human source, a confidential human source. That's kind of how I thought about him. And so that's what Bill put in his notes. And why did you share that piece of information with Bill? Well, so that Bill would know who Michael was and take him as seriously as I did. And the other part of this was to tell Bill, I was quite concerned after my discussion with Michael about us needing to move quickly to investigate this before it got published. So I needed to explain this to Bill. I said, hey, this is serious material from a serious guy, and we need to get moving on it quickly if we're going to do something about this. I was trying to imbue with him a sense of urgency. I think you testified yesterday that by this time you were at least generally aware that he was working for the DNC in connection with those hacks. So yeah, I knew that. And what, if anything, did you say to Bill about that? He says, I think I told him, like, okay, this is who Michael is, represented the DNC with the Russians, investigating Hillary and that whole thing, just to orient Bill about who he was. And then to explain, but in this case, he said he's not appearing on behalf of them, okay? But in this case, that's the third time or fourth time. In this case, he said he's not appearing on behalf of them. In this case, he's coming in as a good citizen. So, you know, lawyers have clients. They have different clients, a lot of clients. Michael was doing this in a different capacity. So the prosecutor is going to just really dig in on this. So just to be clear, based on what Sussmann said during the meeting, did you think he was there seeing you on behalf of the DNC? No. And just to be clear, did you think he was there to see you on behalf of the Hillary Clinton campaign? No. Right? 2 no's on that. No clients. Why? Why not, Jim? Because he said he wasn't. He said he was there on behalf of, in the text message that we have, and also in his statement to me, he said he was not there on behalf of any client. That's why I didn't think he was there on behalf of a client, because he told me twice. Prosecutor says, okay, take it easy. Don't kill me, okay? Okay, would it be fair to say that you oriented Bill as to who Sussmann was? Is that what you were saying you were doing? Yeah, he already said that. Who Michael was and the importance and the urgency of the material. So after you did that, did you share with Bill the substance of the allegation? I described it to Bill, said there was a surreptitious communications channel, Spectrum Health node, trying to obscure communication, maybe using Tor and other things. I wanted to get rid of this material as quickly as possible. I hated having it on my desk because it was evidence of a crime potentially. And it's certainly foreign intelligence information is what he's thinking. And so it's not, obviously, it was all a bunch of fake garbage that was concocted by Fusion. And so being a lawyer and not an agent, I didn't want to have this material any longer than I needed to. And I believe that. And just so everyone is clear, he says, the prosecutor says, as the assistant director, would Bill be the special agent assigned on this thing? Yeah, he's got a career and Bill's not a lawyer. No, he might have a law degree. I can't remember. But he would be sort of serving as the FBI agent assigned. Yes, he would. And do you recall at some point throughout the investigation here that you were shown notes that came from Bill? He says, yes, I do remember that. And could I show you this document? He says, sure. Yeah, go ahead. Do you recognize this? Yes, I do. What is it? Oh, yeah, these are the notes I've seen previously that came from Bill. Perfect, says the prosecutor. We're going to move to have 243 admitted. Then he shows that up on the screen. Now, Mr. Baker, I know that I'm not going to ask you to vouch for the fact that these are Bill's notes, but that's your understanding based on what others have told you, right? They've told you that these are Bill's notes. And by the way, these are the notes I talked about. They're in the mind map. So if you want to see the actual notes, they are right here under Bill. You can see exactly what he said in those notes there. But he says, why don't you walk us through these notes to the extent that they accord with your recollection of what's happening. I also recognize it's not your handwriting, so it may not be easy for you to read. He says it's better than mine. Bill's got good handwriting. And I just want you to go down here and read the first part. It's circled 1. It says Michael Sussmann. Then it goes up like a plus. And then just let me stop you there. Here he's reading it. He says, Attorney Perkins Coy, and then a dash. He says, quote, said not doing this for any client. Right, that's in the notes, and you can read that right there in the upper dash. Said not doing this for any client. And the prosecutor stops him there. Does that accord or not? Does that match your statement? He says, that accords with what I told Mr. Bill pre-step. Yep, that matches exactly what I said. Sussmann came in, told me that he was not working here on behalf of any particular client. That matched his text message he sent the night before we had the meeting. And I heard it so clearly that I communicated that to Bill, and Bill put it in his notes. And now that I'm reading his notes, it looks like he got it right, because that's exactly what I remember. And the phrase said, not doing this for any client, according to the prosecutor. You recall him repeating that in the meeting there, Jim? Yes, he did say that. Okay, perfect. Love it. Continue on, says the prosecutor. He says, well, below it says Michael. It says represents the DNC Clinton Foundation. He said, let me stop you there. Which part of your testimony does that reflect, if any? In other words, what is it? He says, that's my recollection. Michael had represented the DNC. It says Clinton Foundation, by my recollection, it was actually the Hillary Clinton campaign. I might have said Clinton Foundation, or Bill might have misunderstood me. So yes, I can't explain that, but I did say something about the Clintons. And the prosecutor wants to be clear on this because the defense is going to beat him up over this. Well, but he didn't work for the Clinton Foundation, did he? And so his notes are wrong, aren't they? Right? So the prosecutor wants to get clear on this. So just to be clear, it says represents the DNC and the Clinton Foundation. Did you understand that to mean he was representing them there on the 19th? No. So in other matters, he says, right. No, in other matters. Again, I was trying to orient Bill and establish his bona fides. Make sure that he knew he was credible as a source. And the prosecutor says, continue on. So below that, it's talking about former DOJ officials. You were also former DOJ. Next line has a bullet point, says, been approached by prominent cyber people like academics. What does core POC or core POCs mean? I think that's a reference to points of contact, he says. And they're going through the rest of the notes. They bring up another document on the screen talking about the specific details, points of contact. Another little notation, just read that for us. It says people like Matt Blaze, Steve Bellovin, and all the people that he had referenced previously. So he's trying to make the showing that Bill got the notes right. Bill properly recorded what Baker had told him. And the prosecutor asks him, if you could just briefly remind the jury, how did all this come up with Mr. Sussmann? My recollection is that Michael said people he was working with are high caliber people, highly respected academics who've got the good data. They go through the rest of the notes. This is going to go over to the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, or other organizations, which we've already talked about. He says they're concerned if they publish the article, people are going to start communicating this about this on the internet. Communication streams are very ephemeral. They disappear quickly. And so if it's published, we're not going to be able to see it. And they've already really belabored this point, I think, pretty much. Talking about the media and really the rest of those notes. And then they get back into Tor. I think you testified before you had familiarity with Tor. What's this Tor about? And talking about having conversations with Bill about a criminal investigation there. Prosecutor's a little bit off on a tangent. He says, now let's go back. You said that you think you probably had the materials in your possession when you spoke to Bill. And what, if anything, recognizing it's 6 years ago, was it a long call or a lengthy call? I'm not sure. And I believe Bill sent the materials over to somebody else. I can't remember specifically where they went. Other than Bill, did you tell anyone else about this allegation that came in from Sussmann? I believe I told my senior leadership team and a couple other people. Talks about general counsel and really how this works at the FBI, saying I also had the rank of assistant director, so I was on the same rank as Bill. General counsel, below the general counsel, we've got deputy general counsels, and now he's going to be explaining about this woman, Tricia Anderson, who happened to be one of the deputy counsel who worked for him. And we're going to go through the same thing, right? Who is she? What does she do? Why is she important? Did you talk to her? Yes, I did. I gave her a short summary of what happened here. You testified that you said that Sussmann was not here on behalf of a client. Did you tell that to Miss Anderson? Yes, I did. She was the main lawyer for Bill and national security. She handled counterintelligence and all this stuff. She was the main lawyer. And so, yes, we had daily meetings with her. We had monthly meetings. I was with my team a lot. And your chief of staff, you've got one of those, and you've got conference rooms and all this stuff, right? All foundational stuff. We see a new thing gets admitted. There are notes now from Miss Anderson's notebook. And again, those are also here on the mind map. They are linked under Trish Anderson. So if you zoom in on this one and we open that one, we already covered that, but you can take a look at it. They move that in and they're going to ask him to go through this one. 9/19/16 is the meeting, deputies meeting. What happened here? And he's giving us a hypothetical, something sensitive on a national security issues. I had numerous interactions with Tricia throughout all of this. Show the document, put it on the screen. What did the person write on this document? Says, looks like something like meeting with Baker. It says, quote, and this is Mr. Baker actually reading this, right? These are Tricia's notes. Baker is reading Tricia's notes now. Says, quote, no specific client, but group of cyber academics talked with him about research. Article this Friday, New York Times, Wash, Looks like I'm interpreting it as Washington Post, and then it fades out. Okay, so now we got 2 notes. So Bill confirmed that Baker said not there on behalf of a client, and Trisha is doubling down on it. So we've got 2 now who are saying that Baker communicated, Sussmann communicated no representation of a client. And is all this consistent with your meeting with Sussmann? Baker says, yeah, it's consistent. Yeah, very consistent. And how about the text messages you received? Is this consistent with those? Yep, also very consistent. We get an objection from Berkowitz, which is sustained. How would you, let's see what the objection is about. And then how about with what you told Bill? Yeah, so it's just sort of too far removed. Couple questions being repeated. Who was your supervisory chain at the FBI? Who did you report to? It looks like Andy McCabe was the deputy director. We all know Andy McCabe. How often did you speak? FBI director was James Comey. We spoke multiple times per day. What's a chain of custody? Well, we talked about all that yesterday, and so we're not going to dig back into that again. But there was a chain of custody document, and to sort of do a quick recall on this, chain of custody is just connecting the dots between evidence, really. Who has a piece of evidence and how is it transferred from one person to another? So person A gives it to person B gives it to person C. We want to make sure that that evidence that we receive at person C is very valid. We want to make sure that person B didn't tamper with it. So we got to know who person B is and what they did with that evidence. And so they have a log. So person B had it for 1 hour. So we can go back and log. What were you doing there, person B? Okay, so this evidence is probably pretty good, but there are times when it's not, like if person B gets terminated from the police force now for maybe crimes of moral turpitude, lying, integrity violations. Could be a problem. But they're asking about this. We're going to skip through all of it. Initial receipt. You recall one way or another, you told somebody to sign this form, got the materials, forms get passed around. Do you recall one way or another whether you told that person? Yeah, I don't recall telling the person. Oh, here it is. Yeah, remember we talked about this earlier also. I forgot about this guy. Day 2 of the trial was Special Agent Hellman. Special Agent Hellman was the guy who actually got the materials. He was really frustrated. We talked about this with Jim Baker. Jim Baker didn't tell him where he got this. And this was on day 2. And in his transcripts, he said, I needed context. I needed to know where this came from so that I could give it the proper vetting. Because if this came from Hillary Clinton, I'm going to analyze it differently. And that makes sense. So this is where the prosecutor is going with this line of questioning. Where'd you give this? I don't recall what they wanted. Is it possible that you chose not to reveal to that person Is it possible that you chose not to reveal to the person who had given you the material? So kind of a bad question. Yes. In other words, Baker doesn't remember if he communicated to that special agent about where the materials came from. So he's saying it is possible that maybe I didn't tell them where it came from. If that is what happened, why would you not tell them about it, where it came from? He says, well, as I said earlier, this is very sensitive. If Michael was bringing me this, then at that point, I would have thought of Michael as a source for the FBI, and it's sensitive, and I want to protect his identity. And I wouldn't want anybody to know who he was more than they absolutely has to. So I protect the identity of confidential human sources. Critically important to the FBI. And I would not have wanted to tell anybody who didn't have any need to know about this type of material. I'd already told the information to the head of counterintelligence, to Peter Strzok, and I didn't think I needed to expand the knowledge, that circle of knowledge, any more than had to be the case. And when you said you might have thought of Sussmann as a source, you mean you thought he signed up as an official source? No, just somebody that had written an agreement. I mean, he had a badge, right? The prosecutor asks now, if you had learned or known that Sussmann was a lawyer for a client, would you have done the same thing? Would you have protected his identity in the same manner? Baker says, no, I don't think so. Well, because he'd be the lawyer representing somebody whose identity he may or may not have disclosed. So this actually would have been handled differently. Prosecutor asks, Mr. Baker, you testified earlier that your bosses, McCabe and Comey, do you think you informed either of them after you learned about this? Yes, he says, I believe I reported it to both of them. I told both of them, he says. Any recollection on how they responded? Says, yeah, they were concerned about it also. And for the record, at the time, Trump was a candidate for office. And so the FBI was investigating all of these allegations. Very, very high importance to the FBI. We have another email here that came from Comey. Came in Thursday, September 22nd, after the meeting. 11:14 a.m. Meeting between a number of people, Bill, Mike, and Director McCabe. And this was right after the meeting. Mr. Comey was the director. McCabe was the director, the deputy director. Bill was the assistant. There's a CD in there. There's a date. Talking about press things, talking about an email chain. And look at this. What was this? Baker says, so I had conversations initially about it with Bill. There were other leaders that we just saw on the email chain. I don't remember who had the idea, but the basic agreed upon plan that we came up with was this. Hey, Jim, go back to Michael, see if he's willing to disclose the name of the reporter or the reporters because we need more time. This material is just the way it is. We're going to need more time to investigate it. So we've got to see if we can go to the press and ask them to hold off on publishing this for a period of time. As I said earlier, in order to figure out what was going on and before people who were communicating were aware we might be investigating it or somebody might be investigating it. So they're freaking out. They're trying to get information, more information about it, and Sussmann is not giving it to them. They want to know who the people are in the press so that they can shut it down. Sussmann's not going to give it to them. And you did go back to Sussmann within a couple days. Yeah, I think it was very soon because of the urgency. We expected they would have to talk about their senior leadership in the news. And so you called Mr. Sussmann? Yeah, that's my recollection. Another exhibit gets moved in. Looks like it's a bill from Verizon. Who's the listed party on the bill? Michael Sussmann. They got his Verizon bill. They enter this into evidence. It's a billing record. There's a bench conference. So this is taking place outside of the jury. Defense says, Your Honor, I hadn't seen this exhibit before. I don't know what this is. While I have no objection to the phone record, it contains Mr. Sussmann's home address. I think those should be redacted. Prosecutor says, no problem. We'll go ahead and conceal those things. And the judge says, how much longer do you have here with Baker? Prosecutor, Your Honor, it's going to be quite a while. He says, all right, well, whenever you get to a stopping point, and they do now, they take a break, 15-minute break, they come back, and they ask juror number 5 to stay back. And this is the problem we talked about at the start of the show today. We've got Michael Sussmann has a daughter who's on the same crew team as a juror. The court holds back juror number 5, says, all right, ma'am, we've received your note and I've shared it with the attorneys here. I understand you've recently realized your daughter and Mr. Sussmann's daughter are on the same crew team. Is that true? Yes, she says. Court says, and you were not aware of that information when you filled out the questionnaire, right? Juror number 5 says, no, certainly not. This is quite surprising. The court says, you were not aware here when you were at the bench on Monday? Juror 5, no, sir, I wasn't. Okay. Court says, all right. Had you known about that connection when you filled out your form, you would have been telling us about that, right? Yeah. And it's not going to impact your verdict? No. Obviously, I would have disclosed it, but no, my answers are not changed. And the way I'm sitting here now, I can be fair and balanced. All right. Judge says, do you know Mr. Sussmann's daughter? Says, no, I don't know her. She's a year or two behind my daughter. My daughter's a senior, so. Do you know Mr. Sussmann and his family? No. Obviously, when my daughter mentioned it, I thought I should talk to the other crew parents. I don't recall certainly meeting Sussmann. I don't recall meeting anybody else on that same crew team. So the judge goes, this is just perfect. There's just perfect. So the court says, counselor, what do you guys say? And the prosecutor, Brittany Shaw, jumps up and she says, look, sorry, Judge, I hate to do this, but we would request that juror number 5 get the boot. She's got to be excused. I think this would be a very difficult situation. And the court says, well, we got to talk about that outside the presence of the juror. Any voir dire questions? And this is a little bit interesting, okay? So that means that the prosecutor just said that in front of the juror, which is really not good form, right? Oh my gosh. Okay, so the prosecutor says, you're a loser, you've got to go. So that juror is obviously going to be mad at the prosecutors now, which is just great. Perfect. So the judge corrects the record on that. So, why don't we talk about that after outside the juror is gone? Do you have any questions for the juror? So then the prosecutor says, oh, yeah, I probably should have done that first before I made my arguments. Mr. Shaw, Ms. Shaw is the prosecutor, says, all right, let me ask you some questions, juror number 5. In terms of your daughter's relationship with the Sussman daughters, do they have any classes together or anything? I don't know. I'm afraid this is the first time she's ever mentioned it. I don't actually know his daughter's name. She just mentioned, oh, a girl on my crew team, her father's involved in this case. Turns out her dad is. Obviously not understanding the connection, because what do high schoolers know? I believe she's a few years behind, but it's a small crew team. She's obviously would know her from that. I would doubt they would have classes together, being a senior and a few years earlier. How many girls are on the crew team, says the prosecutor? I think 30 and 40, juror 5 says. I should know that, she says. Is it even the practice of these parents to go to these crew events? She says, yeah, we go. And do they sort of organize pre and post gatherings for the team? Like you guys get together and hang out? And she says, actually, I should mention my daughter is a coxswain. Don't even know what that is. And she's one of the 3 captains, one of the 3 senior captains. So I've got a bit of a role this year. So I actually am pretty involved. But I've never had a crew dinner at my house. But of course, I would have seen the girls at the races. She's the coxswain. What the heck is that? Is that a crew? Is that a crew term? Let's see what this is. Yeah, it's the person in charge of the boat. I learned a new word. Here you go. The coxswain is the person in charge of the boat. Particularly, it's navigating and steering. Look, I'm from Arizona. Okay, we don't have any water here, right? So I don't even know what the heck that is. All right, I know what a saguaro cactus is, and that's about it. All right, so juror number 5 says, is it 8 rowers or 4? 4 and 8s, and they're all talking about rowing. And so the defense chimes in and says, look, have you talked about this with your daughter? No, I haven't. Okay, discussed it with anybody else? No, I haven't. So the court says, all right, look, our objective is to have fair and impartial jurors. Can you do that? Yes, I can. I don't think if that would affect my ability. So then finally, the judge says, okay, now you're excused. And so now let's make some arguments. Now, the judge says, all right, back in session after the recess. Shaw stands up. Judge, I want to make my record with respect to this. If she had known that this was something that happened when she was filling out her questionnaire, she would have been booted. We would have used our strikes or whatever. She should not stay on the jury. Okay, Mr. Berkowitz, the defense, what do you have to say about this? First of all, on repeated questioning by both of you, she said she could be fair and impartial. And so we think she should stay. And the court says, okay, the court's going to deny the government's motion to unseat juror 5. She's going to stay. The connection is not so close that I think it impacts her impartiality. She brought the connection voluntarily to the court's attention. And just because the daughters are on the same team, they're not even friends. And it's a large team, so we're going to keep juror number 5. All right. They come back after the break. Baker is back on the stand. And DeFilippis is back. He says, we've got a long time to keep talking about this stuff. Says, Mr. Baker, you're back now. And I think we were talking before you testified. You said that you believe you called Sussmann in connection with the decision to reach out to him, right? So he came to you. You had a meeting with the FBI. They said, go back and talk to Sussmann, see if he can give us some more info. They throw another exhibit up on the screen. There's a phone number on the record. Is that familiar to you, Baker? Yes, it is. What number is that? Well, that was the phone number on my desk at the FBI. 202 area code, which is Washington. Several 6-8 numbers associated with this. Look at these records. What do you see here on 9/21 at 3:34 p.m.? Looks like a phone call, doesn't it? You see where it says incoming calls? I do. And Mr. Baker, does that accord with generally about the time period where you and Sussmann were having conversations? Yes, it does. What's your recollection about that call that you had with Sussmann? Baker says the point of this phone call was to ask Michael about the identity of the reporter that he had referenced when meeting with me. You recall what he told you then, Jim? Well, to the best of my recollection, he said he had to get back to me. He couldn't give us the name of the reporter. That he couldn't answer that question on the spot. That he would have to check with somebody before he could get back to me. Wonder who he had to check with. Marc Elias, I wonder. Rodney Jaffe? Fusion GPS? I don't know. And for the jury's benefit, asks the prosecutor, what's the point of trying to find out who the reporter is. If you're the FBI, why might you need to know that? Obvious, we've already talked about this. They want to reach out and delay the publication. Then we talk about a text message chain introduced as evidence. They throw that up on the screen. Mr. Baker, says the prosecutor, can you please look at this text message from September 21st, 2016? Look at the top of the page here. Is this a continuation of your text with Sussmann? Yes, it is. Michael Sussmann? Yes. And so just read for the jury the message that came in on September 21st at 10:07 p.m., would you? Baker says, sure. He says, it says, Jim, sorry, I have been unable to respond sooner. Travel and person's availability were not ideal this afternoon and this evening. I am working on your request and expect to have an answer for you by 9 a.m. tomorrow. I'm hoping for a positive response, right? I'm looking into who this reporter was, where all this was coming from. I'll get back to you 9 a.m. tomorrow. Prosecutor says, all right, so we got to remind ourselves. The phone record that we looked at came at 3:34 p.m. You recall that, and Baker's texting you at 10:07. So what do you understand Sussmann is trying to communicate to you? What is he trying to say there? Put it in your own words there, Jim. Jim says to the jury, I think Michael was working hard to respond to my request about the identity of the reporter and that he hadn't been able to contact the people he needed to contact yet, and he would get back to me. Everything was going in the direction. He hoped the FBI would be optimistic about the possibility about getting the identity of the reporter. So when he said I hadn't been able to respond sooner, what did that mean? He said, I concluded that he hadn't been able to get the identity of the reporter. He says, I mean, Michael's a busy guy. Might have been traveling. I didn't know. And then he needed to talk. My understanding was from our prior conversations, he needed to talk about those experts. Who were they? They were the cybersecurity experts. Any idea who these persons were? No, not really. And you talked to Sussmann. Did he mention anything about a client or clients? No, he didn't. So on September, it looks like there are no further text exchanges that day. That looks right, says Baker. Prosecutor says, my goodness, Mr. Baker, we have another text message right here. This one's interesting. He says, you must be an early riser. There's a message on September 22nd at 4:37 a.m. Whoa, that's early. You see that one? Baker says, yeah, I was probably asleep by that time he sent the text the night before, so I saw it first thing in the morning when I woke up the next day. Okay, well, why do you get up so early? Asked the prosecutor. Baker says to go running on a regular basis to deal with the stress of being the general counsel of the FBI, which I have no doubt is 100% true. It's hard work to concoct criminal charges in different parts of the country. A lot of work. Okay, so September 22nd, if I could redirect your attention back to the Verizon records. Sure, let's take a look at him, he says. Now, I want to direct your attention to this one. You see this call at 10:28 a.m.? Yeah. Same number from a 202 number? Yeah. Looks like the Office of General Counsel. Same time of day, 10:28 a.m. Got it. What do you see there? We see a text message that says, yes, I can tell you. I called your office. Call me when you can. I'm looking at the text message. Does it reflect your refresh your recollection? What did he mean when he said, yes, I can tell you? Baker says, I think that meant that he could tell me the identity of the reporter. And did he eventually tell you the name? Yes, he did. They go back to the records. There's a phone call, 11:05 a.m., lasting 2 minutes. Looks like an incoming call. And a text message at that point as well. And you're fairly certain you spoke with Sussmann at that time? Yes, I was. And did he identify this reporter to you? Yes, he did. It was Eric Lichtblau from the New York Times, the guy who was about to publish the article. Anything else you recall him saying in that statement? Nope, not at that time. I thanked him for the conversation. It was very short. And what did you do when you got the information about this New York Times reporter? Well, we passed it around over to FBI leadership, and Corton reached out to get in touch with Lichtblau. So Corton, also at the FBI, then made contact. They back up. They talk about phone calls with Sussmann. Did he mention any clients to you on either the 21st or the 22nd? No, he didn't. No clients at all. And when you relayed this back to the FBI, when you communicated all of this new information about the Eric Lichtblau story, did you say to the FBI that that was for a client? No, I did not. How many meetings did you have? And did a meeting happen with Lichtblau? Yes, they did. As best I can remember, there were a handful of them. Government prosecutor tries to get an exhibit entered. It's already in, says the courtroom deputy. Defense says no objection. The court says it's already in. Dummies. DeFilippis says, okay, sorry about that. We put this in earlier. Then they throw it up on the screen. They talk about Corcoran, Bowditch, and other associate deputy directors, other people who are having conversations with the New York Times. Prosecutor asks him now, so when you said he's shooting for Sunday, but may not have the details, what did you mean? He says, well, I meant that Eric Lichtblau was shooting to publish the article on Sunday, but may have not had all the details. And that the only place I could have learned more about this was from Michael. And there was a 2-minute phone call, which they talked about Michael. More conversations about prepping Andy at noon. He says the email, we must have been a group of people talking about a meeting with Andy McCabe, the deputy director, sort of second in command at the FBI. Sending emails over to him to prepare him. I will call you this afternoon. Thanks, Bill. And there, this is all conversational about the FBI having conversations about what to do about this New York Times reporter, Lichtblau. And then Lichtblau's responding back and forth. And Lichtblau is also on the mind map, and he's down here under the issues category because Lichtblau doesn't really want to testify. Now, he is on the witness list, and so he hired a lawyer, and the lawyer submitted a motion for a protective order, which looks like this here. Yeah, here it is. So if you want to read the full thing, 13-page document that got filed right before trial started on May 12th, because he doesn't want to testify. He doesn't want to come in and talk, and he's trying to invoke sort of journalistic privilege in order to be precluded from doing that. So the FBI is trying to deal with Lichtblau, and this is all the testimony about that. And more meetings happen in the conference room. Mike Hortan's involved. And, this is kind of the part where they're fleshing out the rest of the conspiracy, that all of these people were really involved in doing things that were not legally related. So Berkowitz makes a number of objections now, saying we're trying to move as quickly as we could through this, but it's taking a long time. Court says go through it a little bit more slowly, talking about Lichtblau, more objections from Berkowitz. Foundation, objection again. The court overruling most of these. Asking, a lot more conversation about Lichtblau. Let's see if we can fast forward through some of this a little bit, get to another issue. Prosecutor is asking him here. At this meeting with Lichtblau, Myers, and Bill, is there anything you recall him saying about the commitments that were made? Yeah. Commitment to continue to our work, continue to do the investigation. There's a concern at the FBI that I encountered in other situations that the fact that the FBI was investigating something, even if they didn't have confidence in the underlying information, they didn't want to report it. So in other words, they might be investigating something they were unsure about, but what they could report is that the FBI was investigating the allegation, right? We made this point earlier saying that the Fusion GPS, Perkins Coie, Sussmann, and Marc Elias were trying to put forward this story and that they're playing both sides. That the allegation is that they're funneling the story to the media, they're funneling the story to the FBI, hoping that they're both going to play off each other, and he's making that point again. So the Berkowitz is now objection, Your Honor, leading. Court asks him to rephrase, right? That's the type of question that you would get in an oppositional sort of inquiry. And I'm trying to fast forward through this. The judge, objection, foundation, Alpha Bank related matters. They talk about bill precepts, direct reports. Can't talk about what the article was involving. No particular file number. A lot here. Now, I scrolled through this earlier. Here's where we get another message now. September 28th, 2016. Jim, text message comes in. Jim, I suspect the story may go live tomorrow. Since the reporters started going to experts and then the subjects, looks like rumors of a big story are trickling out. I think it's going to force the media outlet's hand. They're going to have to publish. I have no actual knowledge of the reporter's timetable, so I'm reading tea leaves, but that's what it looks like to me. And this is really, we're getting closer to October, and they really need this to start landing because the election is right around the corner. Prosecutor asks Bill, so when he sent you this, did he mention that he was working for clients? No, he didn't. And he said that meant that this was going to be published soon and that the FBI needed to get out there and do something about it. And he's basically dissecting this, right? When he said, I have no actual knowledge of the reporter's statements, what do you think he meant? I meant that he wasn't talking to Eric directly, but he was getting this through some other mechanism. And at what time did you have a sense from Sussmann from your calls of whether that he had given these materials to Lichtblau? Did you know one way or the other? Did he give them to him? No, I don't know one way or the other. Did he ever say I gave these materials to Lichtblau? I don't think he ever said that. Okay, thanks. So I'm not sure exactly how relevant a lot of this is. Before you left the FBI, I think you testified you accessed a lot of confidential information, talking about FBI standard operating procedures in investigating cases. Did you do anything before you prepared to depart the Bureau? Yeah, I did. I documented a lot of this stuff. I asked for things to be classified and unclassified. Did you authorize anybody to disclose information? There's a bench conference here talking about the Director of National Intelligence, and the judge wants a confidential bench conference. So look, we don't see anything here. We get multiple pages of a redacted conversation, the end of that. Don't know what they're talking about. And they're going through more exhibits now. Now they fast forward 2 years later, it's 2018. What does the message say? Jim, FYI, New Yorker story pushed back 1 week. Go live next Sunday. Great seeing you this week. We'll be back in touch, Michael. And now he's already left the Bureau. But you were still interacting with Sussmann for some reason. Oh, yeah. So they are just talking about a job offer, a rejection letter at different law firms. It looks like maybe he was actually going to get a job at Perkins Coie. When you left the FBI, what was going on? I was looking for jobs in numerous places at law firms and in-house positions with companies. Did you actually get a job at Perkins Coie? Like, were you going to go work over there with Michael Sussmann and Marc Elias? Well, eventually, Michael worked it out that I ended up having interviews there. Oh my goodness, these two. Sussmann's getting Baker interviews at his law firm in 2018. I went in there, spent a significant part of the day meeting with a number of different folks, with Michael, meeting with a number of different folks at the firm. Did they make you an offer? No, they never made me a job offer. Oh, man. Well, did they give you a rejection letter? He says, well, there was some confusion at one point in time. I was working with a headhunter to try to find a job. They got a communication from Perkins Coie saying that, for lack of a better word, rejected me. And then I told Michael about that. He's like, whoa, that doesn't make sense, based on what he knew. So he went in there and sorted it out. There had been a miscommunication, and so that was reversed, basically. So Sussmann is shilling for James Baker to get a job at the same law firm. Oh. It's unbelievable. But then eventually I got a different job and took that somewhere over in R Street and worked at R Street Institute for some time. I eventually worked at CNN as a legal analyst, and then I got a position at Twitter. So Perkins Coie, an actual law firm, rejected FBI lawyers, but Twitter was like, yeah, we'll take them. It's good. We'll just, if you just rub it off, it's not that bad. All right, got it. So with regard to the offer at Perkins Coie, you never got an offer. At the end of the day, yeah, I don't really know what happened. Then I went over and I just kind of forgot about it. Did the process give you any resentful feelings towards the firm? Like, are you angry at Perkins? Are you angry at Michael Sussmann? Is this making you resentful at them? Are you now testifying against Sussmann because you're a biased person? No, not at all. Not at all. Because the defense is going to beat him up over that. So then they go back now to an October 8th, 2018 text. What did that say? It says protesters outside our Bellevue office. Sussmann, Baker, Steele, and there's a photograph of protesters holding a sign. And Do you have any idea what that means? Now, the defense objects on this because I think there's the photograph. In the photograph, there's a picture of Michael Steele, or there's a note that has Michael Steele's name on there. And of course, we're not allowed to talk about Michael Steele in this case because the preliminary motions said we can't. So the prosecutor says, I don't intend to elicit anything about that. It's a photograph from a Perkins Coie office. Michael and I were out there. There was a coup, anti-protest involved, saying there was going to be a coup against Donald Trump. Were you involved in a coup against Donald Trump? No. Why is someone sending this to you? Are they commiserating? Is this like a meme? He says, well, I think so. I believe in October, there was just people who were angry at Trump and somebody just sent over the meme. There were also congressional inquiries. What was the background for that? It says they were investigating the FBI investigation into Donald Trump and Russia. We remember all of these hearings. Another government exhibit. Go to the next page of the exchange. A prosecutor asks, Mr. Sussmann appears to send you a news article, an opinion article. What was that? Well, that was a Wall Street Journal opinion article asking, who is Michael Sussmann? Highly critical of Michael. Why did you receive those articles? He says, I don't know. I don't think I read them. I think I skimmed them. But they were talking about Michael was being criticized for me. So he calling him a traitor and that we were all coup plotters and all of this. Is Michael Sussmann an honorable man? So he's walking him through all of the news articles. Specifically, did you focus on any of these paragraphs? I mean, goodness. Prosecutor says there's a screenshot. Mr. Sussmann sent you a message. Hope your day 2 went well. Here's the letter to the editor. Let's talk about the future. Jim, what does day 2 mean? Oh, well, that's the second day of interviewing that I had with the 2 House committee members and their staff, right? So Sussmann, even in 2018, is still sending friendly, go get 'em text messages. And Baker is asked by the prosecutor, what was your experience with all this? He says, it sucked. Prosecutor asks, what do you mean it sucked? He says, it sucked. It was terrible. I felt it sucked at multiple levels. This is James Baker testifying. Says it sucked because the experience itself, sitting in the room being questioned the way I was being questioned. Yeah, it's difficult to be beaten down by law enforcement officials or people asking you questions, isn't it? He says, sitting in the room being questioned the way I was questioned as a citizen of the United States. Upsetting and appalling to see members of Congress behaving that way they were behaving in 2018. It was very upsetting to me that they were all calling him names and being rude to him, right? Yeah, it sucks when you're not afforded due process and you're being treated like you're already guilty. It sucks. It sucked because I felt as though I had dragged Michael into the maelstrom of discussing him in the first meeting and the whole thing blew up. He says, it sucked because I literally had reporters when I left chasing me down the hallway, running at full speed to try to catch up with me with cameras, running around in front of me to take pictures of me just walking down the hallway. It sucked because the allegation was somehow that the FBI had engaged in some type of improper activity with respect to Mr. Trump. Hello? Did you not? It sucked because my friends had been pilloried in the public. My friends and colleagues had been pilloried in the public improperly, in my view, that we were accused of being traitors and coup plotters. All of this was totally false and wrong. Okay. And so you can tell with me speaking right now, extremely traumatic experience. And we've lived through that and having to revisit in the format in front of Congress. It was terrible. And I thought and still think that as a person who held a position of power, I should be held accountable by the appropriate body. And Mr. Baker, during that interview of Congress, what did you talk about? Wide range of things. So yeah, poor James Baker, yeah. FBI General Counsel is getting some oversight from Congress for their serious misdeeds here. Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, many people at the FBI, all plotting against Donald Trump, and we knew it. Sussmann, Baker, not asking questions about any of this stuff, passing it all around. It was really hard for him. Do you feel bad for him? Yeah, I don't. And in sort of your perspective on the time there, did that constitute a major facet of what you were speaking about? You recognize this exhibit? What is this? It's a text message to Sussmann. Hope your second day went well. So they break that down as well. Some evidentiary problems about admitting the full transcript. talking about evidence. Wait, do we jump into... Berkowitz objects here, saying they can't use this document because it's impeachment material. We're getting close to wrapping up for the day with Baker, but here's what we've got. It says, prosecutor chimes in. Let's go back to page 53. I believe the last round, it was mentioned that Perkins Coie, his firm, had represented the DNC and Hillary. Is that your understanding? That is what they said. I've never confirmed that. I think I read that in the press. All right, so now they're reading through some transcripts actually from the congressional testimony. So the court here is actually instructing the jurors that what's happening is the prosecutor is reading from the actual congressional testimony transcripts. Prosecutor says, yeah, that's what I'm doing. Thanks, Judge. And he's just basically asking Baker if all of the things that he said were true in the congressional testimony. Now, one of the things that was actually not true, is this still your view today, Mr. Baker, that he says, yes, I do not believe that a citizen coming forward with evidence of a crime is improper, right? So that Sussmann, if he was being honest, that's not improper. That's not what we're talking about. So he still holds that opinion. But during his congressional testimony, remember that it's not matching up with what he's saying now. When he testified in Congress, he was asked, did Michael Sussmann say he was there on behalf of a client? He says, at that time, in front of Congress, he said, I don't recall him specifically saying that at that time. And he says, yes. And after that exchange, right, obviously that has changed. He says, I don't recall me saying that. And so you testified on that day. It was a lengthy day. Yeah, long day, 4 or 5 hour sessions. And so obviously you can screw stuff up if you were going through that testimony. And your conversations with Sussmann before the election, could you describe them? He says he came in, all this was gone over, the transcript with the committee. He says, I'll try to summarize it briefly. My basic recollection is, in some way, shape, or form, Michael reached out, we scheduled. He came in, met with me, gave me some evidence, a thumb drive. There were strange interactions that he was seeing. Some people that were his clients, who described, as I recall it, cybersecurity academics and experts, said they found a strange connection between Trump and Russia, a back channel. He presented that information. I called up Bill. I gave him my basic recollection. And I said that they were cybersecurity experts. He says, you used the word clients there. You see that when you testified in front of Congress? Yeah, I see it. What were you saying about that? Why did you say that word clients? He says, well, look, to the best of my recollection, I was just trying, I think, to describe this interaction at a high level. And I obviously used the word in a way that was inaccurate. Okay, prosecutor wants to get clear on this because the defense is going to have fun. They say, at any time between your meeting, did Sussmann tell you that he was working for clients? No. Did Sussmann tell you that he was there for cybersecurity clients or experts? No. And so when you made that statement to Congress, Jim, was it accurate? Was it inaccurate? Your statement, was it inaccurate? Yes, it was. So it was just a slip up. It was an inaccurate statement. It was wrong. I don't know how else to describe it. Yes, it was wrong. I was trying to move quickly. And so he's doubling down on that, right? He's confirming that 100% number. The defense is going to beat him up on that statement. The court is now getting really agitated, as am I. I mean, this is going on and on and on. The court says, counsel, how much longer do you have for crying out loud? Your Honor, this might be a great time to break. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to break. They go to lunch for an hour and 15 minutes, and we have and that was today, so we don't have the nighttime transcripts yet. All right, sir, you can step down. Be seated, everyone. You want to take up this issue at the sidebar? Let's see. There was a classified discovery issue that they're going to talk about, declassifying and stipulations and DeFilippis. Anything else you want to talk about? And are you on schedule, counselor? I'd like to give the jury a little sense of how things are going when they come in tomorrow. Prosecutor says, we are generally on schedule. I think Mr. Baker's testimony is going to take slightly longer, but I expect there will not be more than an hour with him. Okay, so I can tell the jury that we're basically on schedule. I think that's right. Thanks and have a good lunch. And that's the end of that one from once again, Lisa, the AM court reporter who is providing the amazing transcripts. And that is it. So that means for lunch, when we pick this back up after lunch, when we pick this back up tomorrow, we're going to have the second half of Baker's testimony. And it's not going to be that much, right? Because we've got at 12:39, they're going to come back at about, what's that, an hour and 15, so 2 o'clock. So we'll have about two hours of transcripts that we're not going to get to today, but there'll be something we cover tomorrow. It's going to be probably an hour of Baker, and then we'll start cross-examinations, and then tomorrow it's going to be all Baker and then all cross-examinations, and then probably some redirect, and then we'll see what other witnesses we get into. But that was it, and we covered a lot of ground there. Two very, very important witnesses here today, and let's just go back to the mind map and just do a quick recap on where we're at. Here we see we've got Marc Elias, Clinton campaign lawyer, FBI former counsel, general counsel, James Baker. And then we're going to see who else gets called. Robbie Mook is going to be called by the defense. Tom McMahon was being floated around by the prosecution. And so now, my friends, is a good time to say thank you for all of those amazing super chats that came in to help with some of those transcript costs. I appreciate that. Those are $1.20 a page. Every single one of those pages, $1.20. And so your support is very, very much appreciated. But let's see who came in. We had KNT with a transcript. Dono, thank you for that. Malamute Aerospace says, release the hounds. K Bean asked that question earlier about the jury. Thank you, K Bean. Catherine Smith says, transcript funds, but now I'm broke because K Bean broke my laptop with bad jokes. Well, sometimes it's worth it. You know, sometimes a bad joke is worth a broken laptop, because a really bad joke can be really, really good. And so it sounds like K Bean is just delivering those. Love that. We got Win Dennis is here with a very generous transcript. Dono says, okay. You were the real deal. Great input. Great recap. My question is, will Durham bring the heat? Can he put the dog's skull on the steak? Here is $99 for the transcripts to find out. Inquiring minds want to know. And it is a very generous one. Thank you for that, Win Dennis. That's going to be very useful in the transcript fund. But I'm not real sure that Durham is bringing the heat, to be perfectly honest with you. You know, we're seeing some kind of rudimentary mistakes from DeFilippis, and you know, I don't like to talk too badly about attorneys unless their names are, who was the guy out of the Kyle Rittenhouse case? Those two dorks. You know, most prosecutors are you know, I think good people trying to do a good job, and so I try not to be too hard on them a lot. But I do make fun of them. Right? It's sort of that friendly needling. Here, though, there are some interesting things happening. I mean, we've got some objections that have been sustained. We've got DeFilippis, who's made a couple sort of errors, right? Whether you want to say that they were fair or not, the judge did not allow him to impeach Laura Sego yesterday because he didn't bring it up. She sort of was not truthful on the stand, and they released her, and he didn't impeach her. Now, I sort of believe that he was trying to play nice on that. He was trying to follow the judge's rule, but it was a loss, right? It was an error. He lost that battle, and he wasn't able to impeach Laura Sego, and he should have been able to do that. He also had those two objections sustained at the close of yesterday, talking about Marc Elias, had a motion for a mistrial. Britain Shaw had to get up there and try to defend him and save his butt from a mistrial. And then she kind of goofed today by getting in front of the juror number 5, and saying, yeah, you're not trustworthy. Get out of here. And the judge is like, we should make those arguments not in front of her, because now she's going to hate your guts for it. And she's going to probably vote to acquit back there. And if it happens to be the same mom who is a Hillary supporter, maybe a lawyer, maybe voted for Hillary, now you've just got an 0 for 2 on that juror. And so you see some kind of own goals a little bit from the prosecution here. Durham's not doing anything. I guess he's in court, right? But he's not going to get up and make arguments so far as we've seen. He's just sort of, you know, he's kind of the old senior lawyer that they assigned to the cases, and he's letting his associates do the work. So I'm not sure that he is bringing the heat. I mean, we'll see. All of these witnesses have been largely anti-prosecution. They have big open-ended statements that they're being allowed to just run through on a cross-examination. Just tell everything. Mark had the full opportunity to explain his political ideologies to the jurors, who probably agree with him. So I'm not sure how well it's going, if I can be perfectly honest about it. But thank you, Win Dennis. We've got Kay Shaw with another super chat. Thank you for the transcript, Dono. We've got Geocast became a member. Another awesome way to support the work that we do here is becoming a member on YouTube, becoming a member on Locals. When I am not in the middle of multi-hour trial coverages, I'm going to try to create more sort of additional content for the supporters. But I appreciate that. Philip Anderson with a super chat, Dono. Thank you, Philip Anderson, for that. No question, but a nice support. Rolf Peterson says, hey, Baker, any of you hotshot agents so concerned about a compromised presidential candidate that you looked into assault allegations, Biden laptop graft, or the Obama man Ukraine treason? What a joke. That comes in from Rolf Peterson. It's true, right? It's like all of these people sitting around, the world is melting down. Everything is falling. Jim Baker, Marc Elias, we've got Sussmann and Rodney and all of these people. I mean, they are so deep in the Trump derangement syndrome, in the Russian collusion narrative that they just created out of, they scared themselves into this story. None of it was real. It was all concocted by Fusion GPS and Michael Steele, the Trump PP tape. It was all fake. So it's all people sort of deluding themselves, or they actually knew better. They knew it was fake and they were just doing this to win an election. It's probably the latter, if I had to guess. That's from Rolf Peterson. Meanwhile, they're busy, concocting hoaxes at the Governor Whitmer plot, in addition to the Russian collusion hoax. And they also are so incompetent, they couldn't even protect the January 6th Capitol building on that fateful day. All of our agencies, US, CIA, FBI, DOJ, we've got multiple levels of Capitol Hill Police, Sergeant at Arms for both houses, the Metro PD, the Capitol Hill Police Department, US Mint has a police. I mean, every stinking agency has a police department over there. And all of these so-called intelligence officials couldn't intelligence themselves into protecting the Capitol building on a day when everybody was going to be there, that they knew was going to be there because they posted it on the internet. Idiots. All right, we've got Anthony Henson with a super chat, Dono. Thank you for that. No question, but thank you, Anthony Henson. Diamond Gun says, as an Arizonan myself, you and I both know we've got beachfront property. Big coxswain, baby. I'm waiting for California to fall off. Look, I've been saying it for a long time. It's a dumpster fire over in California. I am so sick of the Californians coming over here. If you like your policies, stay over there. All right. And eventually, if we fast forward the geological clock, hopefully sooner rather than later, we get some beachfront property here in Arizona. I don't want any death or destruction. I hope that they move and they relocate peacefully and that it's nice and peaceful. A peaceful earthquake so that we can get some beachfront property. And that's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. But I love my California viewers as well also. All right, who else do we have? Diamond Gun said, big coxswain for California beachfront property. Lava Java Lava. It's been a long time, Lava Java. Good to see you with a nice transcript, super chat, Dono. Mark Pate, also with the super chat, Dono. Thank you, Mark, for that. And all of that goes to the transcripts. They are quite expensive. And so I am very appreciative of all of that. And another good way to support some of the work that we do is by joining over on Locals. And so let me do a quick refresh over here and see what we've got over on the Locals board. A couple comments came in. One from C. Reed says, so juror number 5, who we talked about, is talking to her family as to what trial she is on and did not get the boot. Interesting. Yeah, so daughter knows that she's on the Sussmann trial. Are we really living in an upside down world, says C. Reed? Now I'm mad at the prosecution. Wow, just wow. Can we move for a motion? We can't, there's nothing to motion. Just the general motion, just I'm unhappy. Yeah, a motion that this trial is ridiculous, right? Yeah, motion, judge, this is stupid and I don't like how this is going. I like it. No, I mean, there's really, the trial's right underway if there's something that comes up, but it's the government's burden here to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense really, you don't have to really even put up a defense if you don't want to. They've got to get over that burden, and it's a high burden. And I love that burden. It's a very important burden, very important to our liberty. And it's something that we have to protect at all costs. But It's going to be a difficult case because all these witnesses are Team Sussmann. Vientikis is here, says, just so you know, Rob, we've been conspiring against you over here in the locals chat. We've decided we want you to read out the parts and wear different wigs to personify each person because reasons. So if you get something furry in the mail, you know what it is. Oh, that's going to be fun. All right. Well, this channel might get a lot more interesting here because Vientikis Prime is sending me, I think, some furry material. Could be interesting. And we've got Tremendous in the house. Says, hey, Rob, so glad to see you live streaming again. You mentioned that the spotlight needs to be shown down a couple of times the past couple of days. I was thinking maybe you could give us a description of the spotlight with some arm gestures for emphasis. You know, the word emphasis is always a fun word because I like to say emphasis. Do you get it? All right, that was a fun one for me. Sometimes I do them just for me. If you're going to use the word emphasis, you have to make sure you use it correctly. All right, that one was just for me. And I think what Tremendous is talking about is our intro for the big, beautiful spotlight of justice. And so we may have to save that one for another time. But you're right, Tremendous. It's been some time since we've attended to the beautiful spotlight of justice shining down upon America. But I think that is it for us, my friends. Long show, almost coming up on 3 hours. We squeezed in 8 hours of transcripts, 8 hours of court material into about 2 hours and 50 minutes, and had a lot of fun spending some time with you here to do that. And I'm grateful for you spreading the news about the show and the work that we're doing. All of the transcripts are available on the mind map. The mind map, of course, is available in the link tree in the description below. And so if there's anything you wanted to dive into and look at a little bit closer in detail, I will be posting today's transcripts and tomorrow's transcripts when I get them over on the mind map. But if you enjoy the content, I'd love it if you invited some other people who are interested in this trial to come check out what we're doing. I know there are not a lot of people that are talking about this, unfortunately. And so I appreciate it. I appreciate the eyeballs on this. I think that this is a very important trial that I wish had a little bit more, I'd say, interest, because this stuff it's important to the functioning of our whole country. We got to make sure that the bad actors are rooted out. We've got a lot more elections coming up, and they are going to be very important. So I appreciate your eyeballs on this, for your love and support, sharing the show, for all of the super chats, for everybody that came in today on Locals, joined the chat. It means a lot to me. We're going to be back here to do it all again tomorrow. We've got going to have the afternoon transcripts for day 4. We'll have the mornings for day 5. We're going to do it all again, and I hope that you're here. I would love it if you subscribed if you haven't before you got out of here. One final reminder, we have an amazing law firm in Arizona, rrlawaz.com. If you know anybody, good people charged with crimes, we're on a mission to help them find safety, clarity, and hope, not only in their criminal cases, but in their lives. So anybody charged with any type of crime, anytime the police show up, we're very passionate about helping. We have fun on this channel and get a little bit goofy, but there's a whole other side of serious business that we attend to in Scottsdale. We have an amazing team, and your referrals, you thinking about us, if you come across anybody in a difficult position, really means the world, and it allows us to continue to spend time together here. So I do appreciate that. And that, my friends, is it for us for the day. Thank you for liking this video before you get out of here. I'll see everybody tomorrow. Have a tremendous evening. Spend some time with your friends and family. Get some amazing sleep, because we've got some more transcripts to do tomorrow, and we will be here. I hope you join us. Have a tremendous evening, my friends. Sleep very well. See you back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.